Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Cape Coral City Council. Today is January 12th, 2022. This meeting will now come to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I call roll, I would like to announce that Councilmember Nelson has asked to be excused, and I will mark her so. Mayor Gunter,
Here.
Councilmembers Cosden,
Here.
Hayden,
Here.
Long,
Here.
Shepherd,
Here.
Tate,
Here.
Welsh,
Here.
7 present, 1 excused.
For those of you in the audience who are attending today's meeting and are here regarding the Coral Oaks Golf Course discussion, as indicated in the revised agenda, this item has been withdrawn and should be coming forth in our next regular meeting, which will be next Wednesday. Madam City Clerk?
Your Honor, I neglected to mention I have 2 members that would like to participate remotely, Councilmember Long and Councilmember Cosden.
Okay. Is there a consensus for that?
So moved.
Yes. Yes.
All right. All right, we'll move on to item 4A, which is citizens' input time. Citizens' input is the maximum of 60 minutes is set for the input of citizens on matters concerning city government, 3 minutes per individual, and please remember to state your name for the record. Anyone wishing to speak during citizens' input, we will be utilizing the podium to my left. Good, sir.
John Teleski, Northwest Cape. I just wanted to inform the City Council of something that's going on in our city right now as we speak. Criminals are targeting would-be people that are moving into our homes in the Cape. I'm moving as of February 1st. I was moving into a single-family home, and I rented it online. And I drove by it yesterday in Northwest Cape, and there was 2 cars in the driveway. So I was concerned, so I stopped. There was a lady and her daughter in there that rented the same house online. They got the people for $3,200, and they used the same Rently app that our major distributors use in the Cape, one being First Key. They have 500 homes plus in the Cape, and what they do is they get the person on the phone, they put the advertisement on Realtor.com or Zillow or Craigslist, and they get the would-be renter on the phone, and they get them to go in front of the home, and then they provide a code through Rently. They have to be in front of the building because their phone has to sync with Rently to get it done, and then they send them a code. And they ask the people every single time if it's vacant, and the people say yes, and then they go in, and then within 15 minutes of that, they send them an app on their phone through Zelle or Venmo, and they file an application. And the people, this lady and her daughter, are out $3,200. When I went and talked to her yesterday, she had no idea. I was the 3rd person to come up to the door, and she let me in to talk to me, but from what I understand, there's 4 companies that are not in Florida. They're using the Rently app or the Rently platform to do this. And what they do is everybody knows that you can't rent a single family home for $1,200 or $1,400 in Cape Coral. But if you're not from Cape Coral, you don't know that. These people are from Ohio. So to make a long story short, they're sitting in a building now that they believe that they have a contract with for a year. They're out $3,100 to the scammer, and they have no other place to go. And luckily for these people, they have resources so they have the ability to move out of that house and file the proper application with a company that does do business. But she actually asked this guy to show them a picture. They showed her a license, and they got on FaceTime and showed a picture of the person that she was talking to on the other end. So, and she was a realtor too, from another state, so she thought it was all legit. I just want you guys to be aware of that, because they're definitely targeting, because of our movement and our population growth, they're definitely targeting the city of Cape Coral. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else wishing to speak during citizens' input, please come forward. Seeing none, citizens' input is now closed. Is there any council discussion on citizens' input? Councilmember Tate.
Thank you, Mr. Teleski. I hope that you had those people contact the police department. We have the same issues with some lot fraud going on in real estate. And we have a detective that works exceptionally well with these cases. So I do hope that you or somebody contacted the Cape Coral Police and let them know what's going on. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 4B. B1 is the 2022 state legislative update. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council. Good afternoon. Yesterday marked the beginning of the regular session for the state legislature. In your agenda packet, you have a copy of your approved state legislative agenda. We also provided you some links to the legislative priorities of the Florida League of Cities. This afternoon, we have Nick Matthews, who's joining us virtually from the firm Becker, which represents the city of Cape Coral both in Tallahassee and in Washington, D.C. on legislative issues. And so Nick Matthews is going to walk you through some of the highlights that have happened so far with respect to this legislative session. Also, we'll talk to you a little bit about where we are with respect to those specific funding requests that the city has made of the state legislature for certain projects here in Cape Coral. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Nick Matthews. Nick?
Yes. Hi. Good afternoon. I assume everyone can hear me just fine. Good afternoon, Mayor, members of the council, city manager. Really appreciate the opportunity to appear before you in this, what I hope is a happy new year. It is certainly a happy new year in my house. I would be there in person, but my wife and I just brought home our 2 twin boys from the NICU literally last week. So it's been a little bit of a wild ride for us, but needless to say, it's not there's a couple weeks before I'm traveling and doing a whole lot. But I'm happy to say the full Becker team is in Tallahassee. Ellen, who I work very closely with for the city is in Tallahassee, doing double duty for us. So again, happy to appear. I'd like to just kind of, as the city manager just mentioned, session kicked off this week. It is a 60-day period as stated in the Florida Constitution. Just as kind of to set the table, there's over 3,000 bills filed, which is pretty standard. We'll get into why many of them are not great ideas, but about 3,000 bills. We're looking at a really strong budget year again. Even the governor's proposed budget was over $99 billion. The revenue estimating folks at the state have said that they're expecting the rest of 22 and through the 23 fiscal year to be above pre-pandemic levels, which those were really good years at a state budget level. So that's pretty encouraging. That'll be even better than those. As in years past, we have done everything that we needed to do to be in position to get some state appropriations. The 5 projects have been filed with our sponsors. They have bill numbers. All the forms that the House makes you sign have been submitted. So we are well positioned there. We've checked all those boxes. It is still early, as you can imagine, in the budgetary process, but we are on top of making sure that they get heard in committee. Because as a quick refresher, in the House, these items need to be heard in a subcommittee, appropriations subcommittee, to be eligible to be funded. And they usually pick a few days to just hear these all kind of in bulk. So I'm not concerned. We will be among those. We have Senator Rodriguez and Rep. G. Lombardo have been really great to work with. The only kind of curveball on the appropriations front is Senator Rodriguez is the appropriations chair this year and taking that role very seriously. if some of the council was around 10 years ago when they redistricted, I was actually legislative staff then and saw what a messy process that was, and it went to court. And Senator Rodriguez is really trying to keep his eye focused on a very clean reapportionment process and really nothing else. So we're going to be turning to some of his Senate colleagues to make sure some of our stuff is in the budget. But Representative Gianlombardo has been really, really strong for us in the House and will continue to be. One other interesting point is the Tactical Intelligence and Analytics Center is followed by Persons Valika, who's helping us out, which we really, really appreciate. That's already, I believe that's in committee this week. So long story short, our appropriations are well positioned and we will stay incredibly focused on those. There's no reason not to bring home a good chunk of money this year, considering how strong the budget picture is, the amount of federal dollars that are still at the state level, and a lot of that is one-time stuff that they're going to want to plug into projects and not reoccurring programs and that kind of stuff or new entitlements necessarily. So happy to encouraged on that front, certainly. A kind of less encouraging path is kind of this conversation we have at the beginning of every session. There's probably, half a dozen to a dozen bills that are direct preemptions, direct erosions of local control or mandates. We see this kind of stuff every year. This year has a slightly different flavor. The Senate president in his opening remarks, kind of made it clear his intention was to, I don't want to say go after, but really, really take a strong approach with things that he probably sees are abuses or, like in years past, we have, there's a couple bills of business damages against local government where if you pass an ordinance and then it can be proven that there's a 15% harm to a business in the city, then there's a cause of action against the city. I mean, there's some really kind of funky stuff. There's, one of the bills has a requirement that you can do a citywide economic impact statement, which I think won't be the end of the world. And actually with the city manager, he caught in the bill that the way it was originally filed required us to do a countywide economic statement for a city ordinance, and that would have obviously been impossible. So we've already walked that back to an economic impact statement for the city, and there are some requirements in there that basically create another cause of action against the city and attorneys' fees and all that kind of stuff if ordinances are passed and you have members in your business community who need to sue on behalf of that. Vacation rentals is back again in a much different spot, though. This is probably a little more encouraging. The SB 512 and HB 325 appear to be kind of a compromise, middle of the road approach. I've talked with your staff, and I guess nothing in that jumps out and screams that we need to really, really fight that on its face right now. In fact, that bill passed in the Senate. It passed its first committee 8-0. So, it was much more contentious and much more controversial in years past because of how broad the preemption was. This year, that's not exactly the case. So we want to kind of remain vigilant and make sure that stays in the land of what I would say compromise, as opposed to expanding to a big preemption. And then there's another thing that we see every year is direct kind of wanting to handcuff your, building and zoning departments and cutting into how quick permits can be issued and who can do inspections. And there are several bills on that front that we are working with the sponsors. And I want to say your staff has been, Vince Coturo and Jeff Pearson on these give great feedback in real time. I'm able to coordinate with the League of Cities and even our members of the legislature kind of in real time with really good quality feedback. So I do want to point that out. That is a big asset for us when things are moving quickly and bills are getting heard and amendments are getting filed. It is great to have staff that really jumps on it, reads the bill, and finds these kind of really big blind spots in these things, which is what happens a lot. Rob, I don't know if you want me to go into each individual bill, but I guess I don't know if that's as important right now. Just know that like in years past, there are many of these efforts in front of us. We will do everything we can to either kill them or start amending them to water them down to limit the impact. That's kind of where we are every year. I think, we want to be mindful that some of our delegation members sponsor some of these sometimes, and that's just part of the process. And we have a great working relationship with our delegation members, but we're not always going to agree with their legislation. But the fact that they represent the city gives us an opportunity, I think, to really have a good, honest conversation, and we will make sure that the city's apprised of those conversations. But I'm looking forward to another productive session. I think the budget, like I said earlier, the budget picture is great. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be bringing home money like we have in the last couple of years. And that's kind of where we are at the moment. It's only the first week of session, and I look forward to being in person or zooming in from Tallahassee or whatever the situation calls for along the way.
Thank you, Nick. Councilmember Tate?
Thank you, Nick. There are a couple of things that I was going to send you that keep an eye on. This couple you mentioned, the short-term rentals. It seems there's a myriad of bills. The Florida League of Cities sent us out a cheat sheet with all the bills. There's a myriad of bills about the property appraiser, how he does his work, exemptions that could be devastating for us. I know it says the Florida League is opposing some and some are mandates, but hoping that you'll be able to keep us apprised of those. Some are homestead exemptions, some are how they're going to manage the assessment of homes. It just looks really damaging for us, so I hope you'll keep an eye on that. And for me, a personal interest, there's two bills on pet-related issues that I'd like to keep an eye on, but I was just going to send you my list so you'll be able to keep an eye on them for me.
Certainly, absolutely. And the one thing I would add, council members, I know at the moment, I believe Councilmember Hayden, Nelson, and yourself has expressed interest in going up to Tallahassee, not next week, but the week after, I believe. And I believe, Rob, you're wanting to attend as well. We will start planning meetings and have a full schedule for you, and we'll make sure that some of these items, we're hitting some of these items when we're up there, not just appropriations. We'll try to get in front of folks on some of these kind of funky preemption bills, and then some of these I guess it's property tax bills and appraisal bills and stuff, certainly.
And then I know that it's a federal issue, but is anybody talking up there about the flood insurance and the issues that are facing the state of Florida, both coasts?
I haven't seen the state take a terribly active role at the legislative level on that. We'll kind of keep an eye on it through session, but I mean, it's still largely driven by federal, we need federal legislation at this point. I think it's kind of where things are. And then I believe my DC counterparts are watching that pretty closely. I know there was, I think our Senator Rubio had legislation that doesn't look maybe very promising at the moment, but we'll certainly kind of poke around on the flood insurance side of things at the state level as session plays out.
Okay, and then the last one was charter schools. I know there's a couple things in there for that. So those are just important issues to me, but I'll send you a separate email on them. Thank you, Mayor.
Wonderful.
Any other comments for Nick? And I'll also, Nick, I'll be reaching out to you. I'll be up in Tallahassee, I believe, the first week of February.
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you for the update.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Have a great day. Happy New Year.
Okay, we'll move on to item 2, which that item has been withdrawn. And that was the Coral Oaks Golf Course discussion. And we will move on to item 3, which is the Charter Review Commission and recommendations that not only the commission has given us, but also I believe the city managers had made some recommendations as well. So I'll turn it over to him to start with.
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, you want me to go first with the recommendations from staff, or did?
Sure, you can start with those.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So at the conclusion of your Charter Commission's work when we were advised that they were preparing to send to you 2 recommendations. We were asked to take a look at the charter to determine if there were any opportunities to either revise, modernize, take into account new practices and so forth that may have occurred during the last 10 years or so. So we put together a memo that you have in your packet that takes a look at a variety of areas within the charter. Many of these are relatively minor, some are even just correction of some typographical areas. We made some suggestions to you. They may be good suggestions, they may not be good suggestions, but nevertheless, we looked at areas that we thought that if we were looking at the charter holistically, that perhaps it's time to bring the charter to reflect contemporary practices. And I'll give you an example. I'll start with the first one, which describes the boundaries of the city itself. When you look at the city's charter, I believe somewhere between the first 12 and 17 pages of the charter include a very lengthy legal description. And so we feel that the city's boundaries are pretty much established by law, and every time, or act of the state legislature, and every time we have an annexation, you annex an area by ordinance, and legally you're going in now and you are amending the city's boundaries. So we recommend, and again, I am not a lawyer, so I don't know the proper legal terms to use, but we recommended something that abbreviates that whole process and basically says that the city's boundaries are as established by the state legislature and ordinances of annexation or contraction. So that's what we recommended in the first one. Our second recommendation deals with section 301 of the charter, which is entitled Basic Enumeration. We identified a typographical area. Again, don't know how significant that is or not. One of the things that we were recommending for consideration is eliminating language that currently exists in the charter that basically says, and I'm going to read it, the City of Cape Coral shall not have the power to terminate employment of regular city employees except for cause. The city shall have the power to terminate probationary employees for any reason during the probationary period. And so that continues, and I'm going to get to the next part in 1 second, but I want to stop there. And so the reason we highlighted that is because we believe that Florida is an at-will employment state, number one. And in Florida, employers typically have the ability to discharge employees for no reason at all, as long as it is not an illegal reason, such as discriminatory reasons and things of that nature. We also believe that most of our employees are covered by a collective bargaining agreement between a labor organization and the city, and plus we have existing personnel policies that cover just about all employees. And so we were thinking that perhaps that language is a bit outdated, and it may be appropriate to revisit that. And so then continuing in that same section, it says, alternatively, the city manager shall have the power to terminate employment of assistant city manager, administrative department heads at will upon the payment of an amount up to 4 months of the employee's salary, or, sorry, gotta go to the next page, or amount otherwise provided by law, whichever is less. Again, the thinking here is maybe that's not, it's covered in other areas. It's best covered by either a city ordinance or city personnel policies, and maybe no longer necessary to include in a charter. But we took a stab at least at making a small amendment to that section, and we recommend that perhaps we move it out of that section and you put it under the duties and powers of the city manager, and we came up with something a little different that basically says the city manager shall have the power to terminate the employment of assistant city managers, administrative department heads, and all other professional and administrative employees in the office of the city manager at will. And we stopped it at that. And the thinking behind that is the city manager, regardless of who it is, it happens to be me at this particular state in the city's history, the city manager should have the ability to be able to put together his or her own staff and hold that staff accountable at all times. And if there's a situation where an employee is not performing for a variety of reasons, the manager should have the flexibility to make that change as part of the manager's inner staff, instead of having to go through a process which could be a lengthy process that requires pre-disciplinary notices. It requires sometimes the development of a performance improvement plan in order to develop a case to terminate somebody for, quote, just cause. So that was one area that we had identified. Some other areas that we identified, again, just cleanup language in section 404 that deals with primary elections and districts. It talks about the fact that you will essentially redistrict council districts every 10 years based on federal census data. And then we just recommended that we delete the following phrase, or more frequently, if deemed necessary by the city council. I think the practice has been, a widely accepted practice throughout local government is typically you redistrict only after the census, and you don't go back in and do interim district adjustments. And so we felt that let's reflect the real practice that we employ here in the city and just delete the last phrase there. Another minor recommendation in section 406 includes modernizing terminology and referring to the mayor pro tem, which is a Latin term, and just referring that to that position as the vice mayor. Voting procedure is another area in section 4.16. Right now, the charter requires that you go through a roll call vote for essentially all of your major business items that you approve, except for procedural items. And what we're saying here is just to modernize the practice is that you change that and you go to a voice vote and allow a council member to request a roll call vote if there's any question as to where the votes were when you voted on a particular item. We recommended some changes in section 4.21, Mr. Mayor, that deals with authentication and recording. Basically what happens there in that section, it references having to physically print copies of the charter, ordinances, and resolutions, and we're required to maintain a loose leaf binder of such documents. Well, much has changed since 1970, and all of this information that we maintain is maintained electronically, and so we're suggesting that the language be modernized to reflect that the city clerk's office will maintain the official record, but also will make those same documents available and accessible to the public. And essentially what we're saying there is that we provide that information electronically when requested. And so that's a recommendation there to hopefully improve operations. In section 5.03, talks about the acting city manager. The current language within the ordinance, within the charter basically says that whenever the city manager is temporarily absent or disabled, the city manager must file a written letter with the city clerk advising the organization and the city council that the city manager will be absent and is appointing the assistant city manager to serve in his or her absence. Well, a couple of things to point out there. Number one, we have an assistant city manager position in the city. The job description is approved and adopted by city council. In that job description, it says that the assistant city manager will serve in the city manager's absence. And so I know that the practice that I've used in the times that I've had to be absent is, obviously I notify the clerk, but I also notify all members of council directly when I'm going to be out. I do that by, usually by email, not in a formal written letter to the city clerk. So what we're recommending is just acknowledging the fact that you already have an assistant city manager with that responsibility in his or her job description. And so we don't feel that language is actually necessary anymore. The next area is Section 609, Power of Enforcement, that basically says that the police department shall have the power and authority to, as authorized by law, for enforcing the laws of the United States, state of Florida, and city ordinances of the city of Cape Coral. We felt that language is really no longer necessary because it's usually covered in state law or city ordinance as to who has the ability to implement those ordinances. And so we recommend that language be stricken, and I spent a lot of time researching other municipal charters, and this is the only charter that I found that has that language. And it's the same thing with Section 6.10, which talks about the arrest powers of our police department and the ability to arrest individuals without a warrant, where state law, we believe, currently gives our police officers that authority anyway, and so we don't think that that language is no longer necessary in city charter. Section 708, Public Record, talks about making copies of the budget and capital program available to the public at any suitable places in the city. We know that already Florida statutes requires that we publish our budget and capital program on the city's official website. So we feel that that's covered. And we obviously maintain printed documents here in the building. And so again, we don't think that that's necessarily appropriate to keep in the charter anymore. Section 709 talks about amendments to the budget after the budget is adopted. State law gives local governments the ability to adopt and amend budgets by either ordinance or by resolution. We're proposing that you currently do that by ordinance. We're recommending that you do that by resolution. And the reason for that is when you adopt the budget, you still have to go through the 2 public hearing process anyway, just like you have to do with an ordinance. But after you adopt the budget, it's easier to amend by resolution each time rather than having to do it by ordinance. And in fact, what we would recommend, if you go that direction, as we identify items that come before you for action and approval, that we also include in that resolution a statement that says that your action is also amending the existing budget. So we don't have to come to you. Now we're coming to you 4 times a year to do budget amendments. If we were to go to resolutions, this will allow us to essentially amend the budget each and every time you make a decision that affects the budget. Okay, follow what I'm saying on that particular one? All right, and so so that's what we're recommending there. Section 7.10, lapse of appropriations. We're recommending that we delete that from the city charter and include that language in our official financial policies that will be revised and brought to you at a later date. We believe that has the same force and effect as maintaining the language in the charter. In section 8.02, we made just a minor change regarding council districts, adjustment of districts. We deleted the following words, including nominations. I guess that's what they're referring to, nominations for election, I suppose. So we didn't think that language was necessary. Section 10.05 mentions that the city will be divided in 7 geographical districts, And then it goes on to essentially provide the legal description for each of those districts that council members serve in. What we're saying is we don't think that's necessary in the charter anymore, especially since earlier in the charter in Article 8, it deals with elections and the fact that we'll have 8 council members. And then when you go through the redistricting process, you adopt a new ordinance establishing the new districts. So you're taking care of that via ordinance. So this essentially eliminates another step by having you to adopt it by ordinance and then going back and amending the charter. So, Mr. Mayor, those are the areas that we identified. The Charter Commission selected 2 areas. Did you want me to cover those as well, or do you have that?
I have it, but go ahead.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, I can defer to you because I know you were going to the meetings, those specific meetings.
Okay. All right. The 2 items that the Charter Review Commission brought forward that they felt a change should be made. I know council has been given a copy of this, but for the record, I will name those 2 particular items in 4.06A, which is line item veto. The Charter Review Commission recommended removal of the line item veto language in the charter, which basically affects 4.06 A, B, and D. I will tell you that in the discussion that they had, that particular process was only utilized once that I believe in the history of Cape Coral, but they felt that since it was only used one time, that particular item should be removed from the charter. The other item of discussion, which was the main reason that we embodied the commission, was because of the language that was in our charter that basically we couldn't meet as far as state statutes regarding special elections. And that particular section, which is 4.11, which is vacancies, forfeitures of office, and filling of vacancies, they had gotten direction from the city manager and from the supervisor of elections and came up with the description that we have here today. Not only will this fulfill our statutory requirements with Florida law, but it will also make sure that there is the proper amount of times between elections that we really didn't have before if we needed to have a primary and a general election. Also, I wanted to put this particular topic on a committee of the whole meeting to give each one of you the opportunity to weigh in on this discussion and any recommendations that council may have as well. So with that, I will open up the floor. Councilmember Hayden?
Yeah, and just to clarify, of the 20 or so items that the city manager mentioned, all would have to be changed by referendum and by vote. That's a lot of items, and the city manager used the word minor several times in his discussion. I believe any changes to the charters should be things that we extensively use on a regular basis that really affect and impact the running of the city. And here's the thing about referendums and spending 41 years as a journalist and trying to offer impact and clarification in a few amount of words is difficult. Remember, ballot language is limited to a certain number of words. And for many of these, it would be very, very difficult to explain to the voter what is actually happening without making the voter go to do further research. There just wouldn't be enough words to be able to provide that explanation. And if it's all the legal definitions, all the reasoning, all that, it kind of, and I had this discussion with the city manager, it kind of goes back to a couple of years ago. There was a Florida amendment to make sure that every county makes the sheriff position an elected position. And I believe at the time, all but one county had that as an elected position. So it really didn't affect much of the rest of the state except for that one particular area. And I just don't think, unless it has an overall effect on how we do our business or how the community does business, and like I said, unless it makes a major change in things, I don't know that, well, I don't believe it should be on the ballot. Just to direct a couple things on the voice vote as opposed to roll call. It only takes about 10 seconds to run through a roll call anyway. My concern is we went to a voice vote on yay or nay, and if 4 of us said yay, I think it would be very difficult for the city clerk to all of a sudden try and understand the voice and figure out who that person is, because we'd all be saying it at the same time. So I think what would actually happen is it would take longer to differentiate between who was saying yay and who was saying nay. Moving forward on that, the one I thought about a lot was Florida being an at-will state. And should government be different than the private sector in terms of firing somebody at will? Had a discussion with the city attorney today. I really believe in most cases people are fired for cause. I mean, cause can be really pretty much anything. You're not showing up for work. You're not fulfilling the requirements of any part of your job. So I think in most cases people are being let go for cause anyway. Offering a severance package should be at the discretion of the city manager or the department heads. But I think there's some things in here that can be taken care of by ordinance over changing the charters. The two I thought that made sense to possibly put on the ballot were the line, and the mayor's correct, line item veto's been attempted once, and it probably wasn't attempted in the correct manner it should have been at the time. So here again is another one where it's not really being used, so is it worth putting it on the ballot for something that's probably not going to be used anyway, and something that can be overridden by a majority of council, and something that can be changed anyway on a budget amendment or something further. So I'm not sure that one works. Updating the language on when we can have special elections, should that occur, makes sense to me. So although I appreciate the city manager's hard work in identifying things that might need to be changed, I'm not sure there's a place for it on referendum in the primary or the general, depending on where it would go, and knowing that when we do get to the general, there'll be other amendments on there anyway. I want to make it as easy as possible for voters, especially those that vote by mail and do research things. And I just think coming up with the appropriate language for many of these would be incredibly difficult, and I think would lead to more confusion rather than a best result for what our charter should say. So, thanks, Mayor.
And before I move on with any other council members, Madam City Attorney, I know that as far as placing referendums on the ballot, you can put more on a primary than you can the general, but could you advise council exactly how many we can put on the primary and how many we can put on the general, please?
The city clerk knows that better than I, because that
Okay.
limitation has been placed by the supervisor of elections. It's not a
Madam City
legal
Clerk?
one.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to emphasize that this response is just for 2022, and it could change in the future. Right. So up to 6 items on the primary election ballot and up to 1 item on the general.
Thank you. Okay, our council members that are participating remotely, I'll go to them next. Councilmember Cosden, would you like to weigh in on this discussion?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I do support the 2 recommendations by the Charter Review Commission. I don't have anything additional to recommend from myself. I'm having trouble with the long list from staff. I appreciate the work they did. They obviously poured through the charter and looked for things, and it makes sense, some of them, but I'm concerned about ballot fatigue. Even if we had 6 on the primary and 1 on the general, I think that would be too much for the voters when the majority of the recommendations weren't substantial, as in affecting our everyday operation. There's a few that I'd be fine leaving indefinitely because if it's something that duplicates state statute, then no harm. It just duplicates state statute. There were a couple that I do think are important. I think removing the veto is important because I've seen that done or threatened to be done, and it was always political. It was never for a valid managing the city reason. So I think that's important to remove. If we did do 6 on the primary ballot and 1 on the general, how would we decide which 6 and which 1? I think that would be a really difficult decision. I'm prepared to make that decision, but I think even having 6 on the primary would be too much. I do have more questions about the for cause section that the city manager brought up. Are you saying, Mr. City Manager, that the current charter that we have is in conflict with state law, or it is just an additional layer over state protection for at will? Can you clarify?
I think it provides an additional level of protection for employees that state law does not provide for.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I don't think I have anything else to say right now. I want to hear what my colleagues have to say. Thank you.
And Councilmember Cosden, did you say that you also agree with the special election time frame that's outlined and recommended by the Charter Review Commission?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Councilmember Long, would you like to?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just briefly, I wanted to also concur. I would be in agreement with the recommendations changed to the changes presented by the review committee. For the reasons that were previously mentioned, I think it would be a greater issue than maybe the problem that it's solving to deal with the referendum issues. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I also agree. When you take a look at all of the items, that the Charter Review Commission went through the process and all the discussions that they had, and they came up with these 2 particular items. For me, of course, the time frame that's outlined for special elections, where we weren't meeting state statutes, we have to put that in there. We really don't have a choice. So I definitely would agree to add that on as a referendum. Line item veto, I guess I'm probably with Councilmember Hayden. It's hardly utilized anyway. If it is, this council or any future councils by a majority vote could change a line item veto if a mayor exercised that particular right. So I could go either way on that. As far as the other items that were listed, I agree. I think that anything or any time that you put something on a ballot for a referendum, I don't think that there should be too many items on there because, quite honest, I don't feel that the voters, once they start reading down that list, there's going to come a point in time that they're going to probably not read any longer and move on to the next item on the ballot. So I think that we have to make sure that whatever we put on there is important enough that we do need to change. The only items that I can see that in dire need of changing would be the time frame that's outlined for a special election. When you go through some of the other things that the city manager had pointed out in his office in the charter, I can understand that the employees within the city manager's office, he needs to make sure that he has those particular employees in place to help him in his management of the city. And they're only key employees. It sounds like he's asking to add an additional 4 or 5 classifications. I could go either way on that as well. I can understand it could be somewhat of a hindrance for him, but some of these positions are existing positions. So my question would be, if we were going to move forward on this, I think that if this council decided to go down this path, that we should make sure that it's any new employees, because I would hate to change the classification of an existing employee that may have been here for many, many years and working under a certain umbrella, and then during the course of their tenure, that we've changed their protection and their classification. So if we did move forward with something on that, that would be something that I would definitely be looking for, so we could protect the employees that we do have now. And many of them have been here for quite a bit of time. As far as the other items that the city manager had mentioned, some of those items are, redundant to state statute. I really, like Councilmember Cosden stated, I don't really think that rises to the level to maybe put something on a referendum just because it's redundant in state statute. So that's probably where I am as far as the changes and recommendations to put on a referendum in the future. Definitely the special election timeframe that the Charter Commission made a recommendation on. As far as the veto, I really don't think that rises to the level of concern for me personally. We pretty much do everything here collectively as a body anyway. And if there was a point in time where any mayor exercised that right of line item veto, the remaining council could change that anyway. So I don't, for me, that doesn't rise to a level of concern to put it on for a referendum. With that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Welsh.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my first question is procedure with this. I know we had the Charter Review Commission, and we're going to put these on for this year's election cycle. Do we need to have a Charter Review Commission in order to go for referendum pursuant to our charter now? Like if we wanted to add some of these that we don't put on this year and future years, do we have to go through the whole process again?
No, I believe you'd be able to address it again for the next election cycle, the next time that you would be having an election. If you wanted more time to think about some of these or fine-tune them or whatever options council might be interested in.
Yeah, because my main
The requirement,
concern,
you have to convene the Charter Review Commission every so often, but it doesn't say that that's the only way to attain the referendum language. Whichever ones, by the way, whichever ones council is interested in pursuing, if any, based on today's meeting, we would craft an ordinance for each one of those that would reflect what that ballot referendum would say. And for any of them, if you are interested in any of them and maybe that are not as clear as others, we could always confer with staff in developing those and bringing that language to you. And then it's going to be up to council at that point to decide whether you're going to vote those ordinances up or down. And if you vote them up, then they move forward to the ballot, and if you vote them down, then they do not.
okay. So I'm going to keep mine pretty quick because we've talked about a lot of this already. I'm in favor of the two that the Charter Review Commission came forward with the line item veto and the special election time. Looking at the city managers or the city manager's staff or staff recommendations on some of these, for the sake of ballot fatigue, I'm going to pick two of them, that I would support and feel strongly about. One of them is the at-will employee. I think that we have a lot of that within our collective bargaining agreements and our personnel policies. We are a right-to-work state, and coming from the private sector, you know, you always hear you get the city job and then you have it for life. So I think we entrust the city manager to run his staff as best as he can, and if his hands are tied or from being able to do that, then we're not, I don't think we're doing what is best for the city. So I'm in support of the doing the at-will, adding that one. And then also, which is it's very hard for me to say this because I come from a printing background and I come from a printing standpoint where paper is the #1 renewable resource, but I think for the sake of the city clerk's office, having to keep all those books updated every single week and finding which copies and where, I would also put the 4.21, the authentication and recording. I think that's just more in line with what we all do anyways, so we might as well fix it in the charter because it's only going to become more cumbersome as we go forward to make sure we have a official code book in the council office, official code book in the city office, and if something is not correct, then there could be problems with that. So of all the recommendations, I agree with pretty much all of them, but I'd only want to really bring those 4 forward. So that would be the 4 I would support. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Tate, do you want to go next?
I think everybody said everything. I don't want to belabor it. I do agree with the charter review recommendation for the filling of vacancies and that issue. I think the line item veto, if you put that on this year's election, it's going to look political and just not be of importance. I think there's other ways to handle that. I do think, and I want to thank the city manager for sending us all these so-called modernized terminology. I think it's interesting, and I wish there was a simpler way to update the charter without going to the voters, because they're not going to understand the terminology. But I do think that it would be really important overall when you look at our city, or if somebody's coming to interview for a job, or someone's coming to invest their money in this city and they look at our charter, it would look even more professional and efficient if we did have a lot of these modernizations. It's unfortunate that we have to put everything on the ballot because the citizens will never I'm not saying they're not intelligent, I'm just saying that it's difficult for them when they go to the ballot. We already have 4 seats up, so, and then there'll be other things on for the county. The one thing I did want to ask, on the amendments after the adoption, ordinance resolution, while I don't want to put any more items on the ballot, it appears to me that we could be more efficient in our budgets if we did it by resolution instead of by ordinance, based on what you were telling us. So I would like to discuss that just a little bit more and see. I mean, I think that would be to the citizens' benefit too. We actually have more information coming on the budget. So that's one thing I would like to maybe discuss a little bit further. Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
The only thing I'm for right now is the voting, the election change.
Okay. Councilmember Welsh?
Yeah, looking at some of these, a lot of it is word changing or updating. Is there a way that we could amend the charter that we wouldn't have to go for a referendum just to change words to current terms? Kind of a catch-all?
Madam City Attorney?
We can look further into that and see. These recommendations only came out on Monday, and there's a lot of them, and but we can check. We'll check on that so that we all have the confidence of knowing how we're going forward.
Yeah, because I see if a lot of these are just changing from pro temp to vice or things like that, if we could make a one-clause catch-all that allows us to do that in the future through ordinance or referendum instead of, or ordinance or resolution instead of a full referendum, that might be a way to get more of these done without the ballot fatigue. That was my only question. Thanks.
Councilmember Tate?
Sorry, I have one more question. What's our deadline? What is the time frame that these have to go to the elections office?
I have that for you. Based on information that the clerk provided us, we have to submit the primary ballot language to the supervisor of elections before 5 p.m. on April 25th. And then for the for the general ballot, we need to submit the ballot language before 5 p.m. on July 11th.
Okay, so once we give direction on the ones that we want, the city attorney's office, how much time do you need to prepare the language for the April 25th ballot? Obviously, as much time as possible, but given the scope of time, like if we wanted to delay this until the rest of council was actually back here and say 2 more weeks for the committee of the whole before we made a final decision, would that be possible, or? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I think that that might be in order, only because I know the council members that are not here at the moment, it might be easier to discuss as a whole, so if it's possible to put this on the committee of the whole for 2 weeks from now, and then make a final decision then?
I'll circle back to the council members that are participating remotely. Councilmember Cosden, do you have any further comments?
I neglected to say before that I support the staff recommendation 4.21. I think that would actually be a big palpable change in the way the city runs. It would save resources and probably save money. So that's the one thing I forgot to say. And I do agree with Councilmember Tate on discussing this when we're all together in person, if we can do that. Thank you.
Councilmember Long.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I also would be amenable to putting this on the next CAL so we can all discuss it in person.
Councilmember Welsh.
I think everyone was in favor of the two from the Charter Review Commission, even the way they are now,
Now, what I have,
or at least the special election one.
yeah,
so
I
that the
think
city attorney's
everybody's in
office-
favor of
Okay.
that, filling the vacancy, and I'll give you what, as far as those two items, Councilmember Hayden was for filling the vacancy and not to veto. Councilmember Cosden was for both. Councilmember Long was for both. Councilmember Welsh was for both. Councilmember Tate was for filling the vacancy and new timeline only, and Councilmember Shepherd was that as well, and myself. I could go either way. I think the filling of the vacancy is the most important. The veto, I don't really feel that that rises to the level of concern for me. So it looks like with who we have participating today, we would probably have everyone in favor of filling in the vacancy change, and we have 4 people that did not want the veto to move forward, and we have 3. But I do also hear the remainder of council that maybe we should put this on a Cal agenda item again, hopefully in 2 weeks. The only person that we don't have participating tonight is Councilmember Nelson, so it would be nice to hear from her as well. So collectively as a council, we can make a decision and move forward from there. So, Madam City Clerk, could you add that to our Cal meeting? Do we have one in 2 weeks?
I just checked our calendar, and the next committee of the whole is February 9th.
So February 9th, does that give you enough time, Madam City Attorney?
Yes, and let me assure council that the one about the special elections, we knew that that was probably one that was going to be supported because it was so vital. And so that language is, I mean, it's not in its final form, but pretty much the language has been drafted. It's been approved through the Supervisor of Elections office. And so that one is almost but not quite ready to go. So there will be no problem with getting that one forward. Because I know that you're recognizing the importance of that and you don't have to worry about that one.
Okay, Councilmember Walsh, did you have something else?
That was it. I just wanted to make sure we had that 1 or 2 going before we decided to talk about it again.
Okay, all right, so Madam City Clerk, if you could add that to the February 9th, I believe you said,
Yes, Your Honor.
as an agenda item, and we'll pick this conversation up again and hopefully we will all be present during that meeting. Okay, I'll move on to the next topic of discussion, which is item B4, Economic Development Ad valorem Tax Exemption. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Give me 1 second to get organized here. So, Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, you recently adopted the Cape Competes program, which outlines several new programs and initiatives to help carry out our economic and business development strategy. I mentioned that during that process there was an additional tool that we were looking at that we would bring back to you for further discussion independent of Cape Competes, and that is the Economic Development Ad valorem tax exemption that cities and counties are authorized by the Florida Constitution and also state law to offer new businesses locating to a community or businesses that are expanding and creating new jobs. And so I'm going to turn it over to the Assistant City Manager, Connie Barron, in just 1 second. But the premise behind this, Mr. Mayor, is that this tool is widely available and used throughout the state. And as you know, that we are the 8th largest city in the state in terms of population. I think in landmass we're the 2nd largest. And so we've got a lot of competition statewide for business investment. And so what we're trying to do with both Cape Competes and this initiative that Ms. Barron is going to talk to you in just a second about is we're trying to make sure that we have all the tools available to us and that the playing field is level. So that if we are competing with, let's say, a city almost directly due east of us that shares very similar characteristics as the city of Cape Coral, all else being equal, we compete favorably. Right now, the city that I'm alluding to, which is very similar to us, they have this tool available to them, and so that may give them an unfair advantage when it comes down to new businesses that are seeking to locate in our area, and also to help support businesses that are here and that are considering expanding and hiring new employees at a wage level that is at or above the Lee County average wage. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Barron real quick, and she's going to go over the thoughts and concepts that we're looking at for our program. Ms. Barron?
Thank you, City Manager. Connie Barron, the Assistant City Manager. This is another item that will be out there for Council's consideration to add to the ballot on a referendum. Because as I note in here, this is something that must be approved by the voters. This is not something that City Council can just simply approve. The Economic Development Ad valorem tax exemption, it is authorized by the Florida Constitution. As the City Manager noted, there are several municipalities around the state of Florida that do already utilize this tool. It gives us another tool in our tool belt to help attract businesses to the city of Cape Coral. What it does, it grants exemptions to specific projects, which, as it says up there, facilitates growth and creates business enterprises. It does offer a limited exemption. It's not a long-term exemption from the municipal ad valorem property taxes. I don't know where any of you are originally from. Well, I know where some of you are originally from, but I'm from Indiana, and up in Indiana, it was not uncommon for the city of Indianapolis or even the state of Indiana to give property tax exemptions to businesses and corporations to locate their businesses within the city or within the state of Florida. So this is a tool that we don't have right now in the city of Cape Coral. So with ours, you can set it up different ways, but what we are proposing, at least right now, is that we do put some limitations on it that the Florida Constitution does not require us to do. So there is a time restriction that we are putting in place, as well as dollar value restrictions. And as I noted before, it must be approved by the voters of the city. So the businesses and developers, the type of services and stuff that are eligible for this type of tax exemption and that create new jobs would be the manufacturing, light industry, technology, corporate offices, business enterprise management, and then there's some other select industries and activities as well. So how does it work? So this is the process that an eligible business would have to go through. They would first have to file a written application with the city manager. The city manager would have 10 days to review and then notify the applicant if the application is complete or if there are any deficiencies. When it is complete, then the next step is that the application is delivered to the property appraiser. And what the property appraiser will do is they will look at the application and they will determine certain things. The first thing they will do is they will look and see how much ad valorem tax revenue is available to the city for the current fiscal year. Then they will take a look at the amount of revenue lost to the city for the current fiscal year due to any other exemptions that the city has already granted. And then they will estimate the amount of revenue that would be lost to the city if this exemption is approved. Once that information is provided from the property tax appraiser, then that comes to the council. So the council will determine whether or not this application is something that they want to approve, and then they would approve it by ordinance. So what is the criteria for the business? There are 3 tiers, and this is just an abbreviated listing of the criteria. The ordinance itself has a little more information in it, but in general, there are three tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And it goes by basically the highest level would be the tier 3. In tier 1, that would be a business that would be paying 100% of the average annual private sector wage. There's also other criteria in there, such as you have to have 10 manufacturing jobs or 10 million in capital investments. And you can see through that list there for the tier 1 what the basic requirements would be. This would be the lowest tier, and because that's the lowest tier, the duration that the city would provide an exemption for would be for 5 years. The next tier would be the one that would pay 115% of the average annual private sector wage. And then, as you can see, the number of manufacturing jobs and the amount of capital investment increases as well. And because it increases, then this would be the second level, and the duration would be for 7 years. Tier 3 would be the highest level, and that would be a corporation or business or developer that would bring in jobs that would pay 125% of the average annual private sector wage. And then they're creating 75 manufacturing jobs or more, and other office jobs. This duration, you could offer the exemption for up to 10 years. With all the tiers, the maximum exemption would be 50%. And what's eligible for the exemption are things like the amount of the building that you build, the expansion that you've done, tangible property. What is not eligible for any of the exemption would be the land itself. So as you can see on here, the maximum exemption for any of the tangible property, 100% of the value of what they've invested as far as building the structure, that would be eligible, but only 50% of the value. If you're located in a brownfield, we don't have very many of those here in Cape Coral, so that doesn't really apply. Or if it's in an enterprise zone, you can get a higher amount of exemption. So what is eligible, as I was mentioning before, up to 100% of the assessed value of all improvements and all tangible personal property. That's what's eligible for a qualifying new business. For an expansion of an existing business, up to 100% of the assessed value of the added improvements for expansion, and then the net increase of all tangible personal property acquired to facilitate the expansion. So that is what is eligible. And again, as I mentioned before on the previous slide, it's a 50% exemption. So what are the financial and the time restrictions with the exemption? What we've talked about and what we've decided to do in our proposed ordinance on the financial, that the estimated annual aggregate amount of property tax revenue that the city will forego will be $2 million each fiscal year. So what that means is if you have given 10 exemptions and the total that the city's going to not receive in property tax value is $2 million, and you get another application in, then you cannot approve that application because you would be at the maximum 2 million. Do we have to have 2 million? No, there's not a limit on it. So if council wanted to change that number, increase it, hopefully not decrease it, but increase it or completely waive it altogether, you could do that. But right now, our language has that $2 million cap. And then on the time limit, if it's approved by the voters, it sunsets after 10 years. The voters would have to approve it again if we wanted to extend it. One thing to note, that even though it sunsets after 10 years, if you had somebody come in on the 9-year, 364th day of the year with an application, and you wanted to approve it, you could approve it, and that application would still continue for, the exemption would continue for 10 years.
And one other point I'd like to make, Mr. Mayor, is that the tax exemption only applies to the, I guess, the general fund portion of the tax bill. So if there is an approved tax levy, let's say associated with a general obligation bond like we have today for Parks GO bond, that would not, the exemption would not apply to any voter approved tax levy. It's only, you know, it's basically the general ad valorem portion of the tax bill.
Correct, right. And that's kind of a brief overview of what we're looking at so far. Again, we need to fine tune that ordinance to bring it to council, but we wanted to at least talk to you about it and see if there's any interest on your end to move forward with this, to put it out to the voters for them to consider it. Again, it's another tool that we don't have right now, and we've at least put some caps on it, and it would be up to you if you wanted to continue with that cap. But we think it would be an added value, something that we could use when we're out there competing against some of these other communities to attract business here. And it's not, when you're looking at the $2 million cap, it's not an extraordinary amount of ad valorem dollars. So again, we'll answer as many questions as we can. It's a fairly new concept to me. There's other parameters in there that we have to follow, things that get a little more complicated, but I wanted to try to simplify it as much as I could, and then we can, the city manager and I'd be happy to answer as many questions as we can.
Councilmember Tate.
My first question is, because it has to go on the ballot, and we were just talking about how many things can go on the ballot.
Right.
And I'm not quite clear, does it go on the primary ballot or would it go on the final ballot?
That's council's decision.
Okay, well, because on the actual ballot for voters, we only have one item that can go on, correct?
On the general, correct.
Okay.
Right.
And so this being is probably a little more complicated than what the charter review things are, I would want to put it on, if we all support it, on the primary election ballot. Where in your presentation does it say anything about existing businesses who wanted to expand?
Right.
I see expansion of existing businesses, but do you have more language there that you can fill in later?
Yes, there's definitely more language within
Okay.
the ordinance itself. I think we sent you a,
Yeah, I looked at
Corrected
that,
that
okay.
too, right,
I just
yes.
need a little bit more clarification on that part. I'm in support of it. I think the more tools we can have in the toolbox to compete with other cities and other counties that are trying to get these businesses, as we continue our progression on Pine Island Road and different Academic Village and all those sites, this is something that we definitely can use. I appreciate the cap. I think it gives us a playing field while not putting us in any jeopardy that I can see financially. So I am in support of it at this time, and I'll see how everyone else feels. Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
I'm in support of this.
Councilmember Welsh.
I'm going to be in support just like Councilwoman Tate is. I like the fact that this sunsets after 10 years. So if it is something that is not working, it goes away. And if it is working, then obviously the voters would continue it.
correct.
Councilmember Hayden.
Yeah, Connie, I'm in support of letting the voters decide on this as well. As far as the timeline for this, let's say it's on the ballot, the voters approve it. When would the beginning date when people could apply begin? Would it be January 1st? Would it be next July? Would it be similar to what we see at the legislative level, depending on how their amendments work? Have we thought about at what point next year this would become effective?
I think, I'm trying to remember that within the ordinance and with the Constitution itself, that it becomes effective the day that the voters approve it. So that's day one of the 10-year process.
Because usually that's
so that starts at day
usually
one.
that's in the ballot language.
Well, I think it's in our ordinance for sure, right. So it starts on the day that the voters approve it, and then so it will end 10 years later. I think we would want to have everything ready to go in a pretty quick turnaround time.
And since we're in this surge right now of commercial development, all these businesses now that have broken ground, getting ready to break ground, have applied for permitting, they would all be eligible?
No.
None of them would be eligible for this?
No, it's new business. They might be eligible if they're an expansion of an existing business, but it's from the time that it's approved.
All right, so, but if all these businesses that are breaking ground this year, none of them, or many of them probably won't be open this year, is it when they open their doors, or is it when they apply for their permits?
I know some of that is covered in the statute, and I don't have it in front of me.
yeah.
It's, it will have to deal, they will be eligible to apply after the referendum is approved. There are limitations in terms of, like, for example, they can't announce, let's say, 6 months before the referendum that they're building a new facility and then hold off until the referendum and then seek an exemption because they've already made the announcement before the referendum. I don't think it will qualify. And so we've got to go back and look, and I'm sorry, I don't have it before me, but there are limitations in statute.
Okay, yeah,
that
'cause
govern
I'm just
when-
looking at it, since it's based on number of employees and things like that, and if these businesses haven't opened yet, and they're just in the middle of construction, I
Yeah,
guess
they
is my question. But from what you're saying, they wouldn't be,
qualify.
they wouldn't.
It would basically qualify, the businesses that would qualify would be, let's say this gets approved this year, January 2nd of next year, you get a company that buys a greenfield and works with you, and you're working on an incentive package, that's when they will become eligible for it, not before then.
This is an interesting one because we've always talked about, we're very, all these other cities that have these don't have our unique situation that are 8% commercial. And we've also talked about beefing up that tax base. This kind of cuts into that a little bit, at least with the tangibles. And so there is, I know we want to attract them, but there is that consideration of, all right, is it worth it for us for that attraction as opposed to the money that we might collect from the tax base? But I've always been in favor of something this significant, obviously, of letting the voters decide. That should always be the way that we attempt to do business. Thanks.
And I wanted to jump back to this slide just to emphasize the types of businesses that would be eligible for this type of an exemption. And we're talking about the manufacturing, the light industry, technology, corporate, and some of the business enterprise. I know some of the developments that we have coming are some mixed-use developments. They might not, they probably would not qualify.
Yeah, and that is actually specific. That's actually specific. When you look at state law, it references targeted industries, and so you have to look back at the industries that the state of Florida has determined to be critical to the state's economy. I think there might be some latitude in the statute that allows also the city to identify targeted industries specific to us, and we've basically done that with Cape Competes. Not everything is a targeted industry. And so, again, there are limits to who qualifies for this. One other thing I do want to point out is that the standard time frame in the statute, not necessarily in our program, for most of these are 10 years. with the exception of data centers. The statute does allow local governments to grant a 20-year tax exemption for data centers.
Yeah, I'll weigh in at this point. I think having another tool in the tool belt can only help us moving forward. And I understand what Councilmember Hayden had stated, that, one of the things that we're trying to do is increase that commercial tax base. But I think that, the other opportunities that we're looking for as well is to bring those companies, larger companies, to our city, to bring high-paying jobs. And I think this will give us an opportunity where we may be able to do that. So I too feel that this is something that the voters should vote on and make their recommendation and let their voice be heard. But I think this could only be an advantage for our city in the long run to attract those higher paying type companies here to the city of Cape Coral. So I would definitely support this as well. Councilmember Cosden, would you like to weigh in on this topic?
I don't have anything else to add. I agree. I think it should go before the voters. I think it's a great proposal.
Councilmember Long.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Thank you. Councilmember Tate?
Just one question. Can you get us a copy of the state statute?
Sure.
So we can read through it and not have to go look for it? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I think, did you get the direction you were looking for, Mr. City Manager?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, so we will continue to work this through and work with the city attorney's office on the appropriate language and bring that back to you at a later date.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, B5, which is alleyway paving assessment program. Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, this item I know has been discussed with the CTAC, and so we are at a point now where staff needs some discussion in terms of how do we go about paying for the last remaining sections of unimproved alleys in the city. And so I'm going to ask your Public Works Director, Michael Ilchizen, and his staff, Stephanie Smith, to come to the podium and lead you through a discussion on a proposed alleyway paving assessment program.
When you're ready there, Mr. Ilchizen.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Mike Ilchizen, Interim Public Works Director. Stephanie is out of the office this week, so you just have me. I just want to make sure everybody has the attachment that we're going to use to follow through at the end of the discussion. So this topic was, as explained, presented at a City of Cape Coral Transportation Advisory Committee meeting a little while ago. There's been some work done with the city's Special Assessment Council to understand what we can and what we can't do. And essentially where we're at is at a point to look at the entire governing body and see what the will is moving this forward. So what we're going to go over is what is an alley project? What does it encompass? What are the funding options and timeframes to accomplish that work? What are the considerations if we want to move forward with an assessment? And then we're going to walk through an example of an assessment should that ultimately be the direction that staff has provided. So within the City of Cape Coral, in our commercial areas, there are alleys that are used by businesses and residences and companies to handle deliveries, solid waste, parking, access, ingress and egress, and several of them throughout the city are not completely built out. So if you were to get behind one of these businesses and try to traverse from one street to another, you would encounter some areas that basically are unimproved. They could be sandy pothole areas, they could be filled in with millings, Some of them have segments of improved areas where you come up to a restaurant or a business, and just behind that immediate vicinity is improved, and then you're back on an unimproved area. There are 8 of those in the city right now, basically along Del Prado and Cape Coral Parkway. Within those areas, staff has gone out and we have designed and permitted improving those alleys so that from street to street, if we were to move forward with a capital improvement project, there would be drainage, utilities, and access management so that you could go from one end to the other. As of July of this year, we went out and obtained kind of an estimate, engineer's estimate for this work. It was estimated to do all 8 of those. We would need $3 million. Over the past several years, we have been appropriating about $500,000 a year towards alley capital improvements. So as we sit today in a capital improvement fund, we have about $1.5 million to put towards that $3 million if we move forward with the capital improvement, and then if we move forward with the assessments, we could recover a portion or all of those funds, and we can talk about that. Any alley that was already fully improved from street to street that just needed a resurfacing was resurfaced, and that funding came out of our annual appropriation for the paving program. So what we're talking about here is how do we get the rest of these 8 alleys fully built out, and so that they could be put onto the all similar to the other alleys, so that they're just resurfaced as part of our normal paving budget. There's generally 3 options to look at. Maybe to kind of set the stage, some of these alleys have what used to be residential property on the back street, and over time we have rezoned those to a commercial piece of property. And so what's happening now is if they're never developed as a commercial property on the back street, it could sit there almost indefinitely until somebody else assembles that property and makes it part of a larger development. So this is why over time you've seen these 8 have kind of sat stagnant, because they're on the back street off of Del Prado. At one time they were residential, and in most of these, like in the example you'll see, there's a lot of residential on that back street, but now they've been rezoned to commercial, and it's kind of an off-street, not a good location, and so you're not seeing commercial activity want to build there, and so they're sitting as an unimproved segment of an alley, and foreseeably will be for a while. So we're trying to figure out a way to actually get the project done and advance that. So the 3 options that we have, the first one is basically what we're operating under today. It's basically what you would consider pay-go or just-in-time. As a development permit is pulled, at that time the developer who's pulling that permit is required to improve the alley behind their property. They pay for it. There's no city bid, there's no city administration, it's part of their project. The second option would be an annual appropriation. This would come from any available resources. As I've said, for the past 3 years, we have been allocating about $500,000 towards alley improvements. So we have about $1.5 million sitting available. If we were to continue this route, we could do smaller projects, but it would take a little bit longer to complete, and we would basically work with the TAC on a kind of a plan forward as to which ones to address first, and then as money comes available, we would continue to do that. And then the final option is really the let's get it done option. We could move forward with an alley assessment. There is a requirement for all those properties that are sitting in front of an unimproved alley that when they come to permit, they would have to build out the alley. So we can move forward with an assessment, advance the project, have it completed earlier, and then we would set up payment terms for those property owners to be able to repay that capital improvement over time, as opposed to like we do now, which is just-in-time pay-go. The considerations, if we were to move forward with an alley assessment, all the properties that front and alley, whether it's they're on the main road or the back road, would benefit from the capital improvement program. So it is a possibility, if it would be the will of the council, we could assess everybody, whether or not they improve the property behind them or not, because what we're doing is we're basically putting together an entire alley program that gives them street-to-street coverage with drainage, with access management, and with utility. So it's not, what we're doing is an improvement above and beyond even what they've done behind their individual lot themselves. There are, as you may know, there are several methods for apportionment of the costs. You can square footage, trip counts, linear foot. There's several of them. The best option for the alley is the linear foot. It is known and factual, and it doesn't require any assumptions. So if we were to look at another option like trip counts, basically we would have to assume what the highest and best use is on a vacant property and relate that to all the trips in the alley. And so when you start adding assumptions into apportionment methodology, it just makes them a little less secure as you move forward. And so in this case, linear foot methodology is the best. Everybody pays based on the amount of footage that they use for the alley we're improving. All the parcels adjacent to all the 8 alleys in the picture have commercial zoning districts. So what that means is when and if they do permit, they're going to be required to build out the alley. So we're not adding, if we move forward with an assessment, the requirement for them to improve the alley and pay for that already exists. It's just we would be advancing that, but at the same time, we would then be allowing them to finance this with a payment term, whereas when you go pay-go just in time, you have to put it all up front and do it at the time of permitting. Some of the improved parcels along the alleys are residential. So as I've said, prior to zoning changes and amendments, some of these properties that are on the back street, the residential street, are residential. And so when we move forward with discussing who's in and who's out, if we want to advance an assessment, just know that some of these people do not currently have a commercial use, and it may never be intended that they have a commercial use, but they could be drawn into the assessment. And then unimproved parcels in commercial zoning districts are required to construct the full width of the alley at the time of permit. So if there, and we'll go through an example at the end, if there's an unimproved lot on the residential street or on the main road on Del Prado or Cape Coral Parkway, if they come in to pull the permit, they are not only required to just build their half of the alley, they're required to build the full width of the alley. So in some cases, you're going to see where there's properties on Del Prado built the entire alley, and the property behind them, residential, is benefiting from the commercial developer who did that. So if we move forward with an alley assessment, depending on what we select and how we go forward, some people will be paying for half or whole, depending on which option we would choose. Now, this table goes with the map, and so what we've done is we've selected one area, one of the unimproved alleys, and we're looking at alley section number 5. So just to kind of lay out the land, because there's a table with numbers and then there's colors. The colors only represent uses. So it's just a way of mentally laying out the pink property or shrimp colored property is a residential property. It's at the far top, far north of the project, and it actually has a physical access to the alley. So if you were to get in that alley, you could turn in and park in front of a residential structure. Having said that, our current codes for residential structures or commercial do not have any distinction on whether or not the building has to face the street or the alley, but the address will always be the residential street. So when you look at this, you could almost, in theory, pick these buildings up and face them any direction. So orientation to the alley doesn't have any play in whether or not they would be in or out. The next color coding is just unimproved lots that are sitting there. The green one are improved commercial, and then the blue is unimproved lots sitting next to an improved portion of the alley. So there's some lots that are sitting in front of an alley that was improved by the commercial on the major street, and then there are some that are sitting in front of an alley that's not improved. And so the colors of the lots are just to explain to you the different uses that are there. Now, in the table, it's easier to start from the far right and work our way back to the left. The very last column, which is option 4, is basically all in. Every parcel that fronts the alley that's going to see an improvement and a benefit from this would be assessed based on the linear foot facing the alley. I'm not saying this is the recommendation or the way we want to go, but this just kind of gives you an example. If we were to fully assess for this entire portion of the alley based on the $3 million at the linear foot cost, everybody all in, whether improved or unimproved, vacant lot, improved alley, unimproved alley, we would bring in just over $500,000, and that would pay for this segment of the alley. Now, for whatever reason, if we believe that those who already improved the alley shouldn't be paying again, then let's back up to the next column, which is option 3. Now we're only dividing it between the two sides on what's improved and looking at what's improved and unimproved, and we would only be bringing in $330,000. The balance of that would come from the $500,000 appropriation the city has put in. So we would not be charging for the portion that's already improved. We would basically be covering that to be resurfaced. If you go one more column over, then we're looking at the commercial side only, and only assessing for the unimproved portions. So if we say, okay, we have some commercial lots that we're able to build without the full build out of the alley, what would that assessment look like? That would bring in $235,000. Again, the balance of improving this entire thing of $500 would come from the appropriation. And then the last one, or the first column, basically looks at only looking at the unimproved, doing the commercial and the residential, and the back street, which is now commercial, and it just basically lowers the commercial side only, basically cuts it in half, because now you have a little bit more, but brings in that same amount because you're only assessing for the unimproved portions of the alley. And that also brings in, like I said, the same amount. It just grabs more parcels to spread that cost over. So with that, we'll open it up to any questions or comments. Again, the reason for the discussion is a lot of these unimproved parcels are on the back streets, so they're not really prone to commercial development, but they're zoned commercial. So we don't really have any firm timeline as to when these would ever be completed. And if we want to finish this, for the city, we're 50 years later and these still aren't done, we're looking at ways to try and advance this to complete them and make them usable alleys.
Just real quick, the red line that's showing the alleyway, can you tell us again what that red line indicates?
Yeah, so the red line is the actual portion of the alley that is unimproved. So red for us is like stop. So if you were driving on that alley, you could get to that red portion and you would be in sand, mud, potholes, water, if it was raining. The orange portions are safe to traverse, but it's not a complete alley, so it's not green. If there were other ones that we had, like we funded for the resurfacing, that, would just be like a green alley, you could drive it. So those red portions are the portions that are unimproved, and the orange portions are the portions that have been improved by developers who have pulled permits and were required to build it out.
And how long have we been having that requirement?
We did some research. We could not find when that policy was instituted. so we don't really have a firm date. But the policy today is and would be enforced if you were to look at this, if you were to pick this top, let's just pick the top yellow one, which is next to the red. If that were to come in and put in, let's say, an insurance sales or a realty sales office on that back road, they would be required to build out the full linear footage of that alley behind their property. Now, if you look at that, the ones that are green on Del Prado, they were able to build at a time when that policy wasn't in effect, so they were able to build without doing that at all. And so this is where, when you're looking at, if you're going to do an assessment, the yellow lot would be required to be building out not only their portion, half of the alley, but also the green. And so the assessment, when you do an assessment, you have a way of kind of normalizing that, or making sure that all parties at least pay for some, because we could then actually get to both of them.
So, but we still don't know when that policy was adopted.
I don't have a firm date on that. We tried to do some research to see if we knew exact. We also tried to look at even just this alley to see if we could identify like the permits, like which, if we could see, okay, in 2001, here was one that was built, and then here was one in 99 to get an idea. And the permit records on those weren't available to actually show when those contributory assets were required to be turned over.
Yeah, because the first thing that jumps out at me when you have this policy in place now and this requirement, if you look at some of the green improved parcels, 38, 36, and 38, 32, or it could be 36, 36. And
36, 36, yep.
And 36, 32, you know, that's improved property, but the alleyway behind it isn't. You had the same thing at 3714. You had the same thing at 3816.
And so likely those were built in the 70s or 80s before that policy was implemented, and they were able to do that and not have to do the full build out.
Right. And, you know, I know I've been here since 2017, and we've been talking about alleyways the whole time that I've been here. And I know we've pretty much resurfaced all the alleyways down in District 1. And that's mainly where these alleyways are. And so as far as assessing any of the property owners that already have an improved alleyway, they've already spent the money. And please correct me if I'm wrong, when we recently repaved these other alleyways, we didn't charge the commercial business or the adjacent property owners any additional assessment. So I don't think that we should do it here. Now, as far as the segments that are unimproved as far as the alleyway is concerned, I think we have to make a decision. We already have some of these businesses or developments have paid for the alleyway, some have not. So the argument's going to be with some of these people, well, wait a minute, some other businesses here didn't pay for their alleyways, and then you have some business owners that did. I know the copy company on Del Prado, I can't remember the name. I think right after I was elected, that was one of the first people that reached out that were concerned, because what they said is, hey, I'm compelled to make the improvement to get a building permit. So behind my building, the improvement was made, but really it's not usable because there's many other segments that are not improved. So therefore, you know, it was kind of a waste of money for me. It's just sitting out there, and it's a blacktop garden that's not being utilized. So I know we have 1.5 in the budget now. We have a shortfall of 1.5. Now, is that shortfall, is that including the monies that we've put into it this year's budget?
Yeah, so we've 500,000 this year and 2 previous years. Okay. So if we kept on that same appropriation schedule, it would take about 3 more years to get to the full 3 million. If we fast track that or escalate it, you know, we could do another. It's a priority. It's a priority. What's the priority?
And why do you think that policy was adopted originally? as far as that improvement, was that something that council approved maybe because of the economic times and? they
Well,
were-
it was not just specifically the alley. The policy was a more broader policy that said that developers had to do a full build-out of the right-of-way in front of and around their businesses. So it was alleys, and if you're on an area, you could see them a lot if you go to like behind BJ's and Sam's. There's a lot of businesses that front kind of in that Pine Island corridor. In front of their business, it'll look like a local road, but then when you get to a developed section, you'll notice there's an added section of asphalt, curb, gutter, and sidewalk. So the policy was really was to put the growth pays for growth and not just impact fees. Impact fees are not enough to cover all of these new curb, gutter, and in some cases can't even fund certain elements like sidewalks and different items. So the idea was to have the developers pay for all the elements related to access to their business. And so it was more than just the alley, it was all of those transportation elements at their property.
And I'll open it up to the floor for discussion, but one more item of clarity. The yellow and blue lots that you've outlined on this map, are these, I see unoccupied lots, but I'm more concerned with the zoning aspect. Is this a multifamily or single-family zoning on the back section of Del Prado here on, what is that, 16th Place?
They're all commercial.
All,
Everything on all 8 of these alleys is commercial zone. There is a segment in the CRA that is a CRA zoning, but it is a commercial zoning. These are non-residential lots. The only difference between the blue and the yellow was to call out for the council that you have some commercial lots on a back street that are in front of a improved alley, and then you have some commercial lots that are in front of a unimproved. So if you were to look at, a good example to look at here is the second yellow one down. It's the largest yellow box, 3717. A portion of that property is sitting on an unimproved alley. But the ends of that property, because they are extending longer than the green box who actually did the improvement, are actually on improved elements. So when we go, if we were to bring them in, then it would be, these are just to point out nuances, because these nuances become likely legal challenges. So the owner of 3727, who's, or the owner of that property, is going to get a smaller assessment, because if we're only assessing for the portion that has unimproved, they're only going to get the linear foot of the red. Or if we want to assess for the whole property and say you didn't improve anything, then we would do the whole thing, and likely there's a nuance of a challenge. They're saying, well, some of it's already improved, why am I paying for the full balance?
so you're saying that the duplexes that are shown in this aerial, which like is 3815, it appears that 3905, and some of the, that appears to be some type of a duplex, but you're saying that is actually zoned commercially?
These are all, every lot in all 8 areas are zoned commercial today.
Okay.
When they were built originally, they were not, but we've since gone through and amended all the zoning in these areas.
But they're non-conforming at this point?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Councilmember Tate.
Okay, so you brought up a lot of good points. First of all, do you remember when we made Southeast 15th Place commercial? Because we thought that that was going to spur the commercial development. But as you can see on this map, that never happened.
It's stalled.
It stalled, and it never worked. So that's why you have like your big yellow square in 3717. 3714 has always had the opportunity to buy that land and to expand their property, but they never did. Okay, so this whole area back here is a mess. And it's a mess with spot zoning, because it's commercially zoned, and most of it is multifamily or vacant, and it's never worked to be what the city had intended it to be. So before we do the alley, do we need to fix the real problem? The real problem is not the alley. I mean, it is. I mean, there's portions of it, believe me, I've taken my car through where the parts where there's no alley. But the real problem is, how do you develop it? We're gonna go back through and fix an alley, but is anybody gonna use it other than the people that are driving back and forth? Because you don't have it. What's the street, is it at the top of your map here at 3624? What's that street number? Is it 36th or 34th? It's not on the map, that's why I'm asking
Oh,
you
it
if
would,
you know.
36, you're on the 36,
Okay,
yeah.
36, okay, so I know exactly where we are. Okay, so I was trying to figure, because here's the funeral home here. What I'm
Yeah,
telling
it's right
you,
at- right at
it
Savona.
doesn't work zoning-wise to go back and spend this kind of money to fix an alleyway where the businesses and the, for instance, the duplexes that the mayor was just talking about, I had one of those listed for sale. We couldn't sell it, and we worked with the city a million times over trying to get it because it was a non-conforming use, and they said, burn it down, and then maybe we'll have some luck, but there's nothing that we can do about it as a city. And we went round and round. So the problem first, before we even do the alley, is to figure out who's gonna use it, because no one's using it, other than the multifamily that's there, the businesses that are trying to use it if they can possibly use it on Del Prado, but they're not using what we intended it to be way back when. So how do we talk about an alley if we haven't figured out who's going to even use the front portion of Southeast 16th Place? I mean, multifamily in this city is you know, extremely valuable at this time, and all the duplexes. And that's what spurred this. We said, well, maybe people will buy up the multifamily, and then we can get these commercial pieces to go 250 feet deep instead of 125. But it never happened.
Well,
So-
and there was discussions, if you remember at the time, we were trying to incentivize full block depth
were, but it
development
didn't
on
work.
Del- Yeah, no,
It's just like some other commercial property where we have to make commercial back to multifamily or to residential because we had good intentions back then, but it doesn't work. This doesn't work. So is there a way to vacate the alleys, bring it back to multifamily, or create a way in which the land becomes more valuable to the people in the front or the people on 16th Place? Because now you're gonna go to this property owner up here in this residential, and you're gonna tell him he has to pay $12,000. He's gonna say, thank you, but no thank you. And then you're gonna go to all these vacant property owners who pay their water and sewer assessment, and now you're gonna say, hey, you gotta now pay for an alley. I know you don't use it, and I know the business in front of you doesn't use it, but you're gonna pay for it. So I just think we have a bigger problem than just fixing an alley. And I'm sorry I'm passionate about it, but it is a mess back there, and unfortunately, it doesn't work what we intended it to be. So I see Vince is here, he's gonna fill me in.
Vince Cotero, Development Services Director. I think there may be a way to accomplish what you are trying to achieve. You know the market better than most in your profession, in real estate, and maybe there were good intentions, as you said years ago, and things didn't work out. But I would not necessarily jump into a recommendation to you to change things back. If it's commercial, should it be residential? If it's not conforming, and so forth. Lee County, in their plan, uses a technique that we've begun to use in our technique where we can recognize uses as conforming in certain areas. And that would take some language changes in the comprehensive plan. For example, in looking at the map, and you mentioned it, Councilmember Tate, that there are some multifamily uses in here.
Yes.
Okay. And all of these lots, as Mike has pointed out, are commercial of some type.
Yes,
I don't know
they
if it's
are.
neighborhood or
Right.
commercial corridor or C1, whatever.
Whatever.
Okay. We might be able to then look at the future land use as the guide, because that's what's going to control. The zoning has to be consistent with that. So if there are commercial land uses in here, and I'm going to make an assumption that it is.
They are.
Okay. We could go to the language in the plan to fix the problem and talk about unique areas. We've done this in other areas where we've said that single family is considered conforming even if the zoning doesn't match, because of the vested nature of our subdivision and many platted lots. And we're dealing with that issue as we speak on a project that Mr. Hernandez assigned us to, is a brand-new, fresh approach on Burnstall Road. We're creating a new future land use district and a new zoning district to go with it, and there's going to be a lot of discussion on that in the very near future. We could do something like that here, where you actually put the language in the document, and then you work on the zoning to implement it.
I just think you have to fix it. So like what you just said, there are duplexes along Del Prado with a non-conforming use. You aren't able to fix that. So far, you haven't been able to fix 1 or 2 or 3 of them that we've brought to the city. So because of that situation where they're zone commercial, they're zone residential in a commercial area, it's a mixed bag of tricks. But my bottom line is you can't fix an alley until you fix this zoning, like you're saying.
Yeah.
And so there's got to be a way to fix all of this.
Okay, I wasn't putting the infrastructure discussion that you're having with Mike in my equation, but I know it's there, and it's very important. What I was merely suggesting is, let us work with the legal department to make those nonconformities conforming. And language would take care of that. A zoning district by itself, placing a zoning district on a piece of property, I agree 100% with you, is not going to fix the problem.
Right.
We need to go deeper into that and look at the root cause. And the root cause is the fact that we have a land use pattern that we want to strive for, and that is commercial. And many councils have told us that. And I know how sensitive the council is to losing commercial land right now. So the root cause is, if that's the pattern you want, or if you want a mix of uses, let's go in that route.
Because most of Del Prado is already built out, and these businesses have all had the opportunity over the years to expand, whether it was for their parking or whether it was to grow their business, whatever, and they didn't take advantage of it. What good does it do to keep it commercial if no one's going to use it? And then we build an alley. Wouldn't we be better vacating the alley, making it, I don't know, go back to multifamily or whatever, and rather than fixing the alley, making it part of the parcel and then letting that person fix it?
That's certainly one option, absolutely, and we can present all the options to you. There isn't just one option here.
I just know that that is a mixed bag of tricks back there, and it doesn't work the way it is. It doesn't, no business has said, I mean, you know, Point 57, they have a parking lot, and then there's an alley, and it goes nowhere. They don't care, they're using it for parking. They've never said, oh, maybe we should buy that so we can park on it. So, but if the city fixes our alley, then we might have better access, but nobody's saying that.
Right.
So, you know, and I know that they're not gonna wanna pay to fix it either, especially in these times, even though, you know, restaurants are good. There's just a bigger problem here.
I know, I agree, and I don't want to belabor it.
So I really don't wanna talk about charging people for alleys until we actually can figure out how we're gonna fix this issue.
Understood. We have a defined area, and we know what we need to say to Public Works, and vice versa. They can educate us more on the alleyway issue, and we can come up with recommendations for it.
Yeah, it's not like the alleys on 47th Terrace, they have a specific purpose.
Right.
There's not like the alleys in the CRA, specific purpose. This does not work, for me, so.
Yeah, and what we would do, I mean, obviously, so if the idea is to take these 8 alleys and say no capital improvement project,
Well,
that obviously is a decision made even prior to, do we want to do the capital improvement project?
right, and I'm not
So
saying all
in-
8 of
in
them,
that
I'm just
case-
saying from 40th Street North.
In that case, if we were to vacate that, some of the practical things that we would have to work through with Vince and his staff, you know, a lot of these alleys, as you know, like the ones in the CRA, this is, you know, in the 70s, there was no requirement for
Right.
dumpster enclosures. So the dumpster's sitting in the alley.
Correct.
So if we vacate that, then we need to work with them on the code on how do we then address some of those things from prior code requirements versus the today
Correct.
code.
I just, like I said, and I'll stop talking, before we go talking about charging people and doing an alley, I want to fix the problem that's systemic on 16th Place. And again, I don't know that commercial will ever work across from these beautiful residential waterfront homes. That's why we had said maybe they'll make a parking, but then they never did that either. So I mean, nobody wants a McDonald's facing their waterfront property. I don't think we could ever go back and do that either.
From a transportation and traffic perspective, having the alley is better than not having the alley, because if not, you're gonna
True.
push all of the postal, all the deliveries for the businesses, all the trash collection out onto Del Prado, and you're gonna have a lot of ingress and egress, whereas if we provide the alley, all of the businesses on Del Prado, all of those drivers can safely maneuver in the alley as opposed to having coming in and out. So there are tangible benefits.
There is a tangible benefit, but that's a very expensive tangible benefit for all the 16th place people that, so up until this point, have done their deliveries, done their mail, and done everything else by going down Del Prado. So I'll wait to hear what everybody else says, but you know how I feel about it. Thanks.
Councilmember Shepherd.
I feel that the alleyway will never be vacated because of what's there now. I believe it's an asset for every property on both sides if it's completed and paved. If they use it or not, it's going to add value to their property. So I think it's an asset. I also think it protects the waterfront homes that we're talking about, because now they don't have to worry about seeing the activities behind the businesses like trash pickup and delivery and things like that. And I do witness that even some of the residential, maybe not on this exact one, but on others, when there are residential properties, or apartments or condos or duplexes on an alleyway, I've noticed that they use the alleyways as well. So I think it's an asset for every property on that strip. If that alleyway is completed and done professionally, it adds value to all the properties. I think it's a deficit to the properties when the alleyway is not complete. I think it takes value away from every property on that strip when the alley's not completed. So I'm for completing the alleyway, and I like number 3, was it? Where we charge everyone that hasn't invested in improving the alleyway, but I don't want to go after businesses that have invested in improving it, because with them it was an investment that added no value because it was putting in an alley to nowhere, and we forced them to do it anyway. So I don't think they should have to pay again.
Yeah, so option 4 was everybody all in, whether you improved or not. Option 3 was the portions of the alley that need to be improved, whether there's a building or not, you're in to help pay for that segment.
Yes, and so I'm for option 3. And for the people that have residential or duplex and all, of course they're going to be upset because they have an additional bill, but I think they all use it. It's going to be an asset to their property if they're having construction done or work done. I've even seen situations where they park behind their property and they use that alley to get there. So it's going to add value. It's going to add more resources to their property. So I think it's an asset for all of them to be finished. I think the negative impact of not doing anything is worse. I think the positive is finishing it.
Councilmember Welsh.
Thank you, Mayor. One quick question, Mike. When we go through this alley, are we only doing the red sections, or are we going to be redoing the entire alley with the new designs and repaving the entire thing?
So unlike what we did in the ones that are already complete where we just resurfaced, in these we've actually designed drainage systems, utilities, all the things that would be done under today's code. So we will be excavating or removing a portion of the paved in order to put the pipes in so that we can get all the stormwater out of here. The ones that have already been done, if sometimes you'll note, if you haven't already, in the summertime you'll get complaints, hey, our alley has water in it, because back when they were built in the 70s and 80s, they were not designed with drainage and infrastructure.
So this is actually going to improve what's already there as well?
Yes, and that's why there is a benefit to even those ones who just paved behind their building. And our assessment council said, because we are actually improving, everybody's getting a benefit above and beyond what's there today, and that's why option 4 is available. But generally, we're doing paving the areas that are not, and then we're adding to the areas that were already paved to make them better.
Okay. If you take a look, all my fellow council members, if you look at this in front of us, I'm going to bring attention to 3717. So when you look at that overhead on 3717, you see what looks like the desired path of people exiting these businesses that are facing Del Prado. The same on 3821 and as well on 3839. It looks like they are just driving on other people's property because there is not an alleyway for them to leave or get through these businesses. So what's currently happening is people are just driving over empty fields. They're stopping where the alleyway stops. They're taking turns. And to me, that's public safety. And also, I agree with Councilmember Shepherd that we need to finish these alleyways or we'll never have anything in those areas. So we're just going to be continuing to do nothing. So I prefer option 3. If you came in and you improved and you already paid, I don't see having to pay again. I think that that extra money can come from what we've already set aside in our $1.5 million. So I would like to go with option 3. Thank you.
And staff does acknowledge in most cases what you pointed out, where the orange stops, which is the improved section. If there is a vacant lot, you typically see people driving over to the improved street. And you can, as you pointed out, that's what you see, where the orange stops, there's usually a cut through.
Councilmember Cosden, would you like to weigh in on this discussion?
Yes, please. Thank you. I'm confused. I'm hearing an echo. Okay, it's gone now. 2 council members just said they wanted option 3 because it doesn't bill existing alleyway owners. But it looks like there are improved alleys in option 3 that we would be billing. Am I correct, in the blue section? Mike?
So the blue section is, yes, the blue section is people that are in front of an improved alley that were not the owner who paid for it. So that section on the blue, the business on Del Prado was the one who actually paid for the improvement.
Okay, so I think maybe the 2 people who said they supported it, I don't know, they can speak for themselves. I think they might have meant option 1. That's the one I would support. I don't think that we should bill people, even though the property changed hands. I bought my house when the assessment was paid, and the property came with the assessment paid, so I don't think it's fair to expect the new owners to pay. So option 1 would be what I would support, and if we have $1.5 million saved up already, if we started and did like a phased plan, and we started with the green properties, which is, let's see, the green ones are commercial only. So those are commercial, existing buildings, but no alleys, right?
Correct. So they were probably built in the 70s or 80s, prior, you know, when we don't know the date, but before the requirement to build out the alley was in place.
So that would be the top priority, in my opinion. And then next would be yellow. So that's how I feel. So option 1 and a 50-50 split between the city's general fund, essentially, and the property owners seems reasonable, because this isn't the same as a residential assessment where only my family benefits from water and sewer. Everybody who drives in that area benefits from an alley. It's not just the property owner. So it makes sense to share. So that's where I am. Thank you.
So to make sure I'm clear, Councilmember Cosden, what you're saying is, if this is a $3 million project, we have $1.5 million set aside now that you want to utilize for this project, and the other $1.5 million, we go with option 1 to fund the remaining balance. Is that correct?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. If I'm understanding correctly, option 1 is a 47% cost share. So it works out the way that I'm imagining it, if I'm right with my math?
Yes, we have that on slide 6, the actual percent recovery.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Long?
Your Honor, Councilmember Long has mentioned he had to step away from the computer for a moment.
Okay. All right. Well, while we're waiting with him, I'll weigh in a little more, and I see Councilmember Shepherd, has his light on. First off, I believe that we need to improve this alleyway. And what we have to decide as a council is, number one, how are we going to pay for it? And the bigger picture that Councilmember Tate brought up is the other properties that are on Southeast 16th. You know, now they apparently are zoned commercially, and we have several non-conforming properties along Southeast 16th Place. So do we keep those parcels commercial? Or sometime in the future, do we come back and decide to change those particular parcels to multifamily or single family? I do believe that probably a majority of the people that are utilizing this alleyway are from the commercial aspect, the parcels that are along Del Prado. So in my opinion, that's probably the users of the alleyway. So I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, first off, are we going to keep those alleyways or those parcels on that alleyway off of Southeast 16th Place? Are we going to keep them commercial? If they are, I do believe that those sides should pay for that alleyway. If we feel that we are going to possibly entertain changing those parcels to multifamily, I think the likelihood of those individuals, whether it's a multifamily or a single family, utilizing the alleyway is probably a lot less likely than the commercial property on Del Prado. So then we may only want to assess the commercial property owners on the Del Prado side. So I think that's the question that we really need to try to identify. Do we want to keep this commercial on both sides of the alleyway? If we do, then that may help us with the decision-making process here. If we say no, we're just going to leave it multifamily, and we think that both sides will benefit from it, then maybe then we take a look at possibly assessing both sides. But I do believe, no matter what we do, that the alleyway needs to be completed. It needs to be functional. This is the only alleyway down in this part of the city that's not completed. We've already resurfaced the remaining alleyways. We paid for that out of the general fund. And I think that we need to make sure that we complete this particular alleyway so it's a functional roadway. Councilmember Shepherd?
Yes, I hear Councilwoman when she mentioned the blue properties, which the back of them is paved, but they never invested in it. So I want to rephrase, and I don't know if 3 covers this. I think every property on that strip should pay their fair share of completing the alley.
That was the reason for option 3, was to capture those properties who are commercial.
If it's paved behind their property, if they never contributed, then they have to contribute, because I believe that it adds value to all. Even if we're working on the zoning situation in the future, I don't think because it's zoned multi-residential or anything like that, that it should exclude them, because then we have to police. Then we're going to have the problem with, say, a multi-housing unit's put up and they're going to have their dumpsters in the back. So they're going to use the alley for their trash. They might use the alley for access to parking on their property. So to have to worry about in the future, if we just charge the commercial, then you're going to have the commercial saying, well, you know, they're using our alley for their properties as well. And that's why I just want to look at it in one direction. And one direction that I want to look at it is it adds value to every property, if they use it or not. You know, what's adjacent to your property is going to add or decline the value of your property. In other situations, if you have a residential property somewhere and you have something very ugly and unfinished next door, it's going to decline the value of your property. So I believe it's an asset for everyone on that strip to have it completed. And I think it should be fair across the board with how everyone has paid, but I believe that people that paid already should not be affected. You know, I also, another thing that we're talking about is, you know, some of this property's zoned commercial, and it's never been used for commercial. None of these businesses along Del Prado have ever bought the back and expanded. I think a lot of that is timing. You know, maybe we haven't hit that time yet. I mean, we're seeing densities really start to increase now, and when you go to other cities that have more density, that has happened. Them businesses have been torn down and bought the property behind them. It's about value. As the density increases in our city and the values go up, then that'll be more advantageous for businesses along Del Prado to do that. It's no different than seeing older waterfront homes in the yacht club. People buy them and they tear them down. Many years ago, people might have never envisioned that happening, but once the value has increased greatly, the house on the property is meaningless, you know. So I just think we're at the turning point where that's going to happen. It hasn't happened yet, but that's a whole nother discussion. So I don't really think that discussion should come into play right now. I think we should look at it as, does a completed alley add value to all the properties on the strip? And I believe it does. Does uncompleting the alleyway give a decline in value to all the properties? Yes, I believe it does. It does add a decline in value to all, if they're using it or not. And I'm for everyone paying their fair share that's on that strip. That's
So
all I have.
I think what I might want to just point out, so I think you said you supported option 3, right? But option 3, if you look at option 3, there are portions of those, for example, at the southern end, let's look at 3905, that is next to an unimproved, but unimproved, but it's not in. So if you're saying, if we can identify anyone that hasn't paid, then option 3 doesn't fully address yours, but we don't have records to actually determine who exactly gave us that contributory asset. So there were some things that we had to do to be safe when it comes to the assessment side. So it's very close to what you're saying, but it's not 100%.
It's not 100%, and I get it.
And then I just wanted to reiterate something I said in the beginning, which is important, relevant to the discussion you're having on whether or not Vince's group goes in there and allows duplexes or residential structures as a conforming use in certain areas. I want to point out the shrimp-colored property, the pink-colored property in the top left. It is a residential structure that has its access in the alley.
Exactly.
So those residents are using the alley to get in and out of their apartment. Our codes do not require residential structures to face any specific orientation. The address will physically be the street address, but all of those blues, all of those yellows could, if the board says, let's make residential uses acceptable here, please know that they could start coming in and facing the alley and never have paid if you don't go that way. So just wanted
And then one more question, just for everybody to think about. If these alleyways are completed, just like we did in the CRA area, a lot of them were redone and completed, what is our plan for the future? Should we have an assessment for when it's time to recoat them and maintain them so that the businesses know that something would be coming down the road if the life expectancy of that new alley in the CRA is 15 years or 20 years? Should we be implementing a future assessment that they can slowly pay on, so when it's time to do the maintenance, or are we going to absorb that as a city like we do our residential streets? So that's
It
something that
it can be
businesses
done.
can plan
We
for?
don't, that's not our current policy or program. So you can assess for capital maintenance. There are other cities, counties have benefit improvement programs. Cities have, transportation or paving assessment programs. We use other funding sources, but certainly if the will at a future date or now is to begin setting up assessments for recurring maintenance, that is an option.
And the reason I say that is because this particular alley that we're looking at, there are businesses on that alley that paid to have theirs done, but they might have paid to have it done 15 years ago. And it might be almost shot.
There are
So
some sections we're gonna have to rebuild.
I want to exclude them in one breath for saying they have invested in the improvement, but maybe there is a maintenance portion that they should be paying in an assessment now, because we're obviously going to have to recoat what they have already paid for and make alterations, like you said, with drainage and plumbing and things like that. So,
The only place that I'm aware we're doing that today is the Del Prado Mall parking lot. That parking lot is for the benefit of the businesses around it. We assess for the capital improvement and the ongoing maintenance.
because I know most businesses with an assessment, if they know about it in the future and they can plan on it and they can make payments on it, then it's not such a shock to their business to just all of a sudden say, hey, it's time to recoat this thing and we're going to hit everybody up. So I'm just trying to let us think of the future as well as we're working out the problem that we're talking about now.
Councilmember Hayden?
Yeah, I think we've gotten derailed a little bit on talking about how this should be zoned or what the future land use might be, when what was in front of us was how we pay for getting the alley paved. I don't know whether it improves property values or not if things are built along the stretch. Most people never see the alleys. Most people, if we have multifamily along this stretch, nobody's going to use the alley to enter or exit. They're going to go out down the road. If it helps them with deliveries or mail or garbage pickup, that's great. So if we continue to put in $500,000 over the next 3 years, we've paid for this. If we established a system where in the future, if this alley needed to be repaved or redone in any way, we could look at an assessment then, we could do that. I'm not sure there's really any fair way with any of these options to assess anybody. You said even the people that have paid for these sections, part of it may be torn up anyway because you may be putting in new drainage pipe. So are we not going to assess them? I would rather we devote the money to get this finished now and look at in the future establishing an assessment that helps go towards repave the alley, kind of like what you said, Dan.
Maintenance.
That's kind of how I'd looked at it. The options seem complicated to me.
So rather than a specific option of an assessment, you're looking at funding option
Yeah,
2, which is the
it sounds like we were
annual
headed down that
appropriation.
road anyway, because what we have already devoted to the project. So, if these alleys are, if this is important for us to get this done, I would prefer we look at it this way. Then obviously in the future, we have to look at land use and how this area can be developed. But, I think our focus right now should be on that, and that's what I would suggest.
That would also be the default option if we don't get clear direction, which, looking at it right now, 2 3s, a 1, an annual appropriation, and 1, let me hold off until the zoning. We would just continue on the annual appropriation.
Now my question, Councilmember Hayden, because you had mentioned getting the project done now. Are you talking about doing the project now, waiting the 3 years?
No, just getting, it would basically finish over the next 3 years, right?
If I preface this discussion on if we get no clear direction, which it looks like we don't have a good consensus here, then what essentially I would do is would go back to the CTAC and say, okay, we're going to work within the annual appropriations that we have. And then I would work with the CTAC to basically put together a program. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start north?
Yeah.
Do you want to start in the CRA? Do you want to start in the one that has the most developed so we can get as many done as quickly as possible? We would work on a program so
Even
that
if we did the assessment, we'd have to do that anyway, right? we'd have
If we
to
did the
establish.
assessment, no, we would come back to you with an assessment resolution. You would impose the assessment, and we would do all 8 this year.
And I'd like to piggyback on what Councilmember Hayden said. You know, when you take a look at these parcels, you know, you have so many different scenarios here. You got some business owners that, I know one business owner that I spoke to several years ago, he says, look, I spent between 40 and 50,000 to do my improvement, and nobody else has done it. So I felt that I've wasted that money. So to go back and assess that gentleman that's already spent $40,000 to $50,000 and did what he was supposed to do, versus maybe another parcel here that was developed before that policy was even implemented. And then you had, you know, a wide range of other issues here. So I kind of agree with Councilmember Hayden. We don't do any type of assessment. We just get it taken care of. I kind of like the idea of maybe a future assessment for maintenance only for not only this alleyways, but all the alleyways in this particular area, and just move forward and get it completed. I would prefer, because I think the longer we wait, the more money it's definitely going to cost us. We've already gotten bids to get it done. We've already engineered the project. Let's just get the project done.
And permits, and we have the permits.
And let's get the project done. That way, we've fulfilled our responsibility in this area to make the alleyway usable, and we don't have broken segments the way it is. And, you know, because all the other alleyways here throughout the city and in the South Cape, we've already taken care of all of them, and we've used general fund money to do that.
Exactly.
So I think that would, for me, since we've had this discussion, I think I would feel more comfortable with that. Let's get it done, use general fund money, and then possibly have staff look at developing an assessment program for the maintenance of not only this alley, but all the alleyways. So that's my opinion on it. Mr. City Manager?
Mr. Mayor, just a question. I need you to help clarify something for me. So you just mentioned, let's get it done. Are you inferring that we get it done this year, or, because we're $1.5 million short, so are you inferring that we propose as part of the FY23 budget that we fund the remaining $1.5 million out of the 23 budget? So give me a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, when I say I don't want to wait 3 years, I don't want to do 5, 5, and 5. If we put this in our FY23 budget, the remaining 1.5, because actually what we'll actually be doing is adding really an additional $1 million. How much?
Yeah, because we would be putting in already
Five.
the extra 500, so it would be an extra $1 million.
Yeah, so it would cost us an extra $1 million to find, and probably would be better to find out, hopefully those bids. I know we've already did the bids, well, I already know we've done the permits, but we could probably redo that here in August or September, and hopefully as soon as that next budget cycle takes effect, then we could go ahead and get this project done.
So, Mr. Mayor, may I offer something else?
Yes, sir.
So you could go to your reserves for the 1.5 million, so you can move forward with the project now. And then next year, just budget an additional $1.5 million to go back into the reserves to replenish. Essentially, you're loaning
Exactly.
the fund out of your reserve fund, and
Right.
you're paying it back next year.
Probably be speeding up the project about 8 months or
Because
so.
you have your permits in place now, you have your bids in place. I think we can only keep the bids active
They've
90 days.
Yeah, they've already expired, but that's okay. We could go out for a bid.
Yeah. All right. I'm okay with either scenario. I'd just rather get it done sooner rather than later.
So then let's do that. Let's go ahead and move on accomplishing this sooner rather than later with a loan from your reserve fund that you'll promise to pay back in FY23.
Right. And I think we have to hear from the rest of council first to make sure that's a consensus. I think we've only heard for a couple of it, myself and Councilmember Hayden, so we'll hear from the rest of council to see what they think. Councilmember Tate?
I'm good with that, and that's why I brought up the whole other issue, is not to complicate things, but because we should be taking care of it, just like we did the other ones. And I have a question, Mike, what about all the other alleys, like follow North 32nd, go on to Prado, go up 16th, all those alleys up there, there are a whole bunch of ones that aren't complete, that need work. So it's not just this section. So it's something we're gonna have to continue to address as we progress.
Yeah, these alleys were the ones identified in this program for.
I get it, but what I'm saying is there are other alleys in the city that are gonna need this same attention. So for this project, I am okay with borrowing from reserves, and thank you, City Manager, for bringing that up, and then we would repay it in the coming year budget and go ahead and get this done. But with the caveat that Mr. Cotero helped me with the rest of the situation.
Councilmember Welsh.
Thank you. I'm okay with whatever we have to do to get this done. One thing I heard from the mayor was that he wants to look into maybe a capital maintenance on all alleyways. To me, that is something I will not ever support, because we're already taxing our businesses and we're trying to gain more commercial and more business here. And if we tell someone that to open a business here, you're gonna have to pay maintenance on the alley behind you and possibly not be able to park cars on the road in front of you. I think as a city, we need to keep our businesses happy the way they are. So I'm okay with moving money from the reserves. I'm okay with option 1. I'm okay with option 3. We need to get this done and promote and generate the city moving forward, especially our commercial districts.
Councilmember Shepherd.
I like the city manager's idea, but I look at it with a broader brush. When I say it adds value to all the properties on that strip, it doesn't just add value to that strip. It adds value to our entire city. Because the way our city looks and appears, I can tell you when we have events downtown and citizens would enter them alleys the way they used to be, that reflects on all of us. That reflects on the entire city as a whole. So I'm about getting it done right away. I'm also about having an assessment that we can start as soon as possible for the maintenance and upkeep of all the alleys. I am not a financial guru, but I see that if we started collecting maintenance assessments on all the ones that are done now, would we be allowed to use that money to help finish the other ones that aren't completed? You know, so use that as a resource as well to finish the others, and then you have this constant flow of maintenance money to keep them all in good shape and to finish the ones that need to be finished. But I see it as an asset for the entire city. This impacts everybody. I believe when these alleyways are professionally done and they look good, it adds value to our city as a whole. So I'm for the city manager's idea for where they get the funds, but I am also for maintenance, because we don't want to have to worry in the future about having the monies to, oh my God, we redid these alleyways 30 years ago and they're all shot. You know, so I think a very small assessment for everyone on these alleys to start as soon as possible is actually relief, because they're not going to feel a big impact someday. And we will have this mechanism to pay for the maintenance, and we will have this mechanism to pay for the ones that need to be completed.
Councilmember Cosden, do you have any additional comments?
I just want to say I support this idea. I like it better than the one that I suggested originally. And I wanted to ask on that note, after Councilmember Shepherd's comments, can we use if we did have a maintenance assessment, could those funds be used to construct alleys, or do they have to be used for maintenance only?
No, you can assess for the capital improvement. It would be outlined in the assessment resolution.
I mean, for the program that he's suggesting, right, where we're using it sounded like it was originally to be just for maintenance, like paving and fixing and connecting, but it sounded like he was suggesting we also use it to fill in these gaps in the next 2-3 years. Or am I misunderstanding?
That's my goal.
Yeah, you could do that. I think what we're contemplating here would not require that, but that is something that could be done, yes.
Okay, I wouldn't be in support of that. I just want to make that clear. But I would be in support of just a general maintenance assessment for the alleys. So anyway, thank you very much.
Councilmember Long, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I too would be in agreement with the current consensus. I think it's time to get it done. Take care of that and go ahead and foot the bill. I also would agree with taking the loan from the reserve as proposed by the city manager. Thank you.
Councilmember Welsh.
Just a quick question. The alleys are owned by the city or are they owned by the commercial property?
They're public.
So the alleys are public property?
Correct.
So by putting a maintenance agreement, the business is basically then paying for public roads just like the front road that they'd be on as well?
Correct.
So we're in essence charging business owners to pay for their alley maintenance when it's not their property?
If you were putting forward an assessment for maintenance, that would be what you would be assessing for. Similar to when we do a utility extension assessment, you're paying for the pipes and the roads, you're paying for the benefit received from the project.
Okay.
But you don't necessarily own the assets.
Yeah, we don't own the alley, but we'd have to pay for them to be upkept. So that's one reason why I'm against it still, but I'll save that for if this comes forward to us again.
Yeah, I think it's another topic of discussion, for sure. It sounds like, city manager, you got the direction as far as alley paving is concerned?
Yes, sir.
And so I think we've probably taken care of that topic.
Thank you, and I just wanted to clarify one thing. My staff wanted to make sure I didn't misspeak. We didn't actually get bids, we had quotes. So now that we have the consensus, we will actually go out and bid the project, hard bid, and get that. So bid didn't expire. The quotes that we had are no longer valid.
So you think in about 4 to 5 month process?
What we will do, we have the permit and the specifications and the design in hand. So we would then work on a front-end document with procurement. They advertise it for 30 days. There's a cure period time for if there's any, bid award objections. Then we schedule it for city council, and then we issue a notice to proceed. It typically takes 90 to 120 days for the whole process.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the last item on the agenda, B6, is mobile food dispensing vehicles. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this is a follow-up conversation to one that we had back in October when we presented a draft ordinance addressing essentially food trucks. We had some significant discussion with council. You gave us some feedback on some changes that you wanted to see. And so we told you that we would bring it back as another cow item before introducing it as a proposed ordinance. So that's what we're doing today. We're going to have Vince Cotero and his staff come up to the podium to walk you through the revisions that we're contemplating based on the feedback that we heard at the last cow. Mr. Cotero?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. For the record, Amy Yearsley with the Department of Development Services. As the city manager indicated, we are just doing a follow-up to our previous discussions on the mobile food dispensing vehicles. This was previously heard at an October Committee of the Whole meeting, and what we're looking for today is consensus on just a couple of items that we think are outstanding. The previous discussion really focused on several issues. The requirements of mobile food trucks to periodically move from a site, to create a process and regulations potentially for food truck courts, parking of these trucks in city-owned parking lots, trash disposal, and the consideration of regulations regarding food halls. So as previously drafted in 6121 and presented, these regulations closely follow the state statute related to mobile food vending vehicles, mobile food dispensing vehicles, which went through the legislature last year and created some exemptions, or preemptions, excuse me. So changes to the LDC would include the use table with the Land Development Code to add in these uses, some specific regulations related to these districts, some conditional use standards, and some new definitions that will mirror the state statute. And some additional definitions from our previous discussion. The mobile food dispensing vehicles are proposed as conditional uses in all non-residential zoning districts and the preservation district. This remains unchanged. So as a result of the last discussion that you all had, staff has looked at some proposed changes and added some new definitions beyond the mobile food dispensing vehicle. The first one you see is a mobile food vendor. This is for mobile food trucks that don't meet the state definition. Mobile food truck courts, we would have a new definition that include multiple mobile food vendors on a site and any related infrastructure associated with multiple food vendors. So your stormwater, your parking, potentially a centralized restroom facility, things like that. And then the final thing that was discussed was food halls. And we would define this really as a restaurant use, and all regulations related to restaurants would apply. This is a use which I think if you follow anything in the news really related to food trucks and things like that, the city of Bonita Springs has a new food hall that's coming online. When we spoke to them, they're really treating theirs as a restaurant. And it really is kind of a natural progression for food trucks through their lifespan. You often see food trucks start out, they maybe start and go into these food halls to kind of expand their business a little more, and often and sometimes they will go to a brick and mortar type restaurant. So it's kind of an evolution of how these uses are used. So we kind of took from our conversation the last time and looked at potential changes to 6121. With regards to mobility, having mobile food vendors and vendors at food truck courts, requiring them to vacate the space for 48 hours once every 30 days. Again, this is a starting point. Trash, a regulation that potentially says all operators must document their arrangements with a commercial waste hauler and that taking of trash to a residential site is prohibited. Potentially prohibiting parking in city parking lots or city properties from a period of midnight to 6 unless the city approves an alternate arrangement. And then having food truck and mobile food vendors through a limited or full site plan approval and having kind of a path to approval for all of these different types of categories of food trucks. And so that would look kind of like this. So what I would call a true food truck would get their zoning certificate of zoning compliance, BTR. They would not have a connection to city utilities because they're self-contained, and we would require it to be on an improved site, which is pretty consistent with most of our regulations here in the city where we have things on improved property. Mobile food vendor, again, that's one that doesn't move. You see these throughout the city in some parking lots. They never move, they're always there. That would require a minor site plan to the existing site. You would have potentially no hose connections, UL approved power, and again, always on required parking, or required on impervious, not on impervious surfaces. A mobile food court would proceed just like any other commercial development. It would go through a site plan process. You would have connection to city utilities, and it would have to be on an impervious surface. And food halls, again, could proceed, again, through just a regular permitting process as a restaurant would. So, impact of the ordinance changes, I think we talked about before at the previous. Right now, any food truck that's operating in the city does not have a certificate of zoning compliance. This would make it required. And then you would have, and that could require changes to their setup, their location, and their operating characteristics. You might have some that are currently operating that are not or maybe on a gravel parking lot. Something like that would have to change. There could be changes to their setups. Food vendors that cannot meet the definitions could still be permitted in compliance with all LDC requirements, which could be problematic for existing operators that are out there that are not moving around. So we really see three things as your policy decisions kind of that are remaining, and I'm going to kind of move these around because we did make a couple suggestions. So the frequency and removal of the true food trucks, mobile food dispensing vehicles. As drafted, we had put move for 48 hours once every 30-day period. That was kind of a suggestion that staff had. We also had the overnight parking on city property and parking lots. We restricted the hours from the previous slide. Let's see. Midnight to 6 a.m. And then finally, one thing I don't think that was touched on, is there a limitation that they want to see of the number of mobile food dispensing vehicles or mobile food vendors on an individual site? Would you like to see just one? Do you care, or would you like to see maybe a sliding scale based on the size of the property? That's something we could look at as well. So with that.
Thank you. Councilmember Hayden.
Yeah, a couple things. Didn't we decide we wanted to deal with food truck courts or food halls in a separate ordinance and not in this one? That we were just going to deal with mobile food trucks in this particular one, not ones that might necessarily be on a site permanently? I thought we had that discussion, maybe not.
Vince Cotero again. Keep in mind, when this ordinance is ready for public hearing, different sections of the code will be highlighted, so you won't necessarily be in the same section. Yes, we are adding different things, and it doesn't necessarily, well, it doesn't pertain just to a food truck, but it'll be across different sections of the ordinance, and we believe that was the wish of the council, to bring in the food court and the food halls into this discussion. That's why we prepared it this way.
I still think I'd prefer keeping them separate, but, and then just for clarification purposes, Amy, you talked about no overnight parking from midnight to 6, but then you're requiring the vendor to move one time for 48 hours over a...
But that's a city parking lot.
Well, this would be specifically for city-owned properties.
Just for city parking
Yes,
lots.
correct.
So if it's on, and I think I used the example that next time, and again, I'll preface this by saying Trepping doesn't have any plans for food courts, but if it was parked on that property, it would only be required to move for 2 days every 31 days.
If it fell under the definition of the mobile food dispensing vehicle, correct.
That part of it concerns me. You know, I think I'd rather see the food trucks move every 48 hours rather than just once over a month period. I think that's a long time. I think that almost makes them close to permanent. So that would be my recommendation for that one. And like I said, Vince, I know what you're saying, but you know, I remember that discussion pretty well about, I think, the food truck courts and what might be planned in different parts of our city is a bigger animal.
May I ask for clarification, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
Are you talking about the food truck that might be parked on a public property or in public right-of-way versus a court where you have a site development plan and a unified plan of development? And there's a site in particular I'm talking about near the bridge that...
Which is the one I'm thinking about. Are we then talking about two different things here?
In my mind, we are.
Okay.
But I want you to tell me if you are not talking about two different things, because we can write it that way.
When I saw food truck court in this particular one, my mind immediately went to the site on the Parkway.
Okay.
And if this is going to be included in that, whether it's and then a food hall, which I'm assuming defined would be something that might be undercover.
Be within a structure, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we have three topics here that we're really discussing. You got the food hall, which my understanding, a lot of other cities, that falls underneath the restaurant regulations and ordinances. And then you have a mobile food truck or trailer, whatever you want to call it. And to me, that's just it. It's mobile. So I agree with Councilmember Hayden. I would be concerned if we allow those vehicles for any extended period of time to set up shop throughout the city. If it's a mobile vending vehicle and it meets the definition of that, then in my opinion, it should be just that, mobile. And whatever the time frame, I think 48 hours would be the max. I agree, that's what we need to do. And then as far as the mobile, the food courts, that's a whole different definition. And I think the criteria and the regulations with a food court could be different than the mobile vending vehicles that travel throughout the city. So, you know, I think there are 3 topics. I agree that we should, at least the food courts and the mobile vending vehicles, we need to establish a regulation and a criteria for each one of those moving forward. If we're doing one, we might as well do the other, in my opinion. Especially since we've already been approached at least twice for a food court here in the city. So I think that we need to be proactive, establish the regulations, what can and can't be done, and it's only going to help those particular developers moving forward if they still have a desire to do that type of development here in the city. So that would be my preference. Councilmember Tate.
Thank you. So going to your policy decisions, I agree with, I think, 2 speakers so far. Every 48 hours, not once in 30 days, but every 48 hours. When I say that, what do we do with those who are already established as part of a business that have maintained that particular status for several years? Are they grandfathered in? There are certain ones like in the downtown that have been there for 20 years, and then there are new ones, and the new ones I understand, but the ones that have been there like 20 years, are we going to make them start moving? Because I don't even know if they move anymore. So that's one question. I totally agree on the overnight parking on city property. Many of the food trucks are using our city lots and taping up valuable space when, so I've seen that in the downtown quite a bit. So I'd agree. And then on the food halls, or whatever we're going to call them, the courts, I understand people want to have them, and I don't disagree that they should be here, but I believe that they should be just like anything else. They come in for a permit, they got to have a site plan, they got to have water, sewer, they got to have garbage, they got to have, you know, all those things. They can't just go to a vacant lot, circle around, and, I mean, unless it's going to be a special event like the German American Club is having one now for some charity, and they're going to all gather up. That's great. I think that's wonderful. But to put that in the middle of a residential section or on a property that goes against residential and call it a food court with 24-hour moving, no, or 30-day moving, no. So those are my issues. So under your policy decisions, every 48 hours they should move. How many food vendors should be allowed on an individual site? If it's one business, it should have one food vendor. And if it is a shopping center, I guess that's going to depend on the shopping center, what they would allow. I don't know what their covenants are, and I don't know what their restrictions are. I don't know how many Coralwood Mall would set up on their property. That's not for me to say. I just think one business, one food court. Yes? Did you?
No, I was going to ask, I was going to give you an example.
Yeah.
Like, so for example, we know at Mercola Market, they now have I think it's every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday.
They have multiple food trucks. So is that one business, and therefore we would only say one food truck, or?
Again, I think that's up to the business. If it is one business, Mercola has many businesses on their multi-properties. They have offices in there, they have other companies in there. So, yeah, no, it's not just Mercola. They have Sandoval Homeowners Associations in there. There's lots of different businesses within there. So that's what I'm saying, depending on the size, if it's a multi-project like Coralwood Mall or like Mercola, I would see that they would have more than one. But again, they would come for 48 hours and they would be gone. And then the other ones like Family Hardware, I know they have them. They have one new one every day, and people line up for it, and they know the schedule because they know they're going to be there, and then they're going to be gone and going to be somewhere else. It drives business to those businesses when these great food trucks show up. So it's a good thing. But when you're asking me how many, it's not like I can just say one. I have to say it's up to the merchant, right? Because, and the size of their property. So if they're an 80 by 100, if they're a standard lot, then they probably can only have one. I don't know. That's your job. Correct,
Well,
Mr.
yes.
Quintero?
That is correct, but keep in mind, part of the answer to that question is going to be found in the fire codes and
Right.
the building codes on separation and health department requirements too. So
Right.
it isn't necessarily what the business wants. It's really what the capacity
What's
would be.
allowed.
So maybe we don't need to specify.
Yeah, if it's already in the codes of some other language, then maybe it's nothing that we have to do, exactly, but we need to find that out.
Potentially be
So,
silent.
and then the overnight parking, I definitely agree, they should not be on our property. So, do we allow them during the day on our property to park or to use our property for mobile food vendors?
Well, we've had some in the past, yes, and we've had some code enforcement issues, yes.
So, but are we going to, is that a practice that you're saying that you want us to do? Because it says they can't park overnight, but can they actually use our parking to set up shop for the day?
And that's something we will write in the ordinance to give you options on, because in our opinion, if you do that, a special permit's going to be needed. You're going to have to approve it. I don't have the ability to allow somebody to
Right, I'm
put
just
down a-
thinking, let's just say the Big John's parking lot. There are like 15 restaurants in there.
Right.
And that's where some of them park overnight. So are you telling me that we would allow a food vendor to go in that parking lot and open up shop for the day, and then all those restaurants are gonna compete with that guy who's not paying any rent or any taxes?
The way that the ordinance is currently written states that they can use the city parking lot with the city's permission.
And I think that needs to continue, right? And so it's not a given, but it gives us the ability, like if we wanted to have a special
A
event.
special
or
event.
a unique situation,
Okay,
that we can allow food
so then
trucks.
you would allow for it, you would have the discretion as to whether they could set up shop there or not?
Absolutely, yes.
Right. And
Okay,
if they-
I can see that, that would be something I can live with, but the rest of it, I have to go with them, I agree.
Councilmember Welsh.
Thank you. So you're saying that the move it once a month for 48 hours, that is for mobile food vendors or only mobile food dispensing vehicles?
Mobile food dispensing vehicles, and I believe it also has it as mobile food vendors.
So
But you could we could distinguish between the two. It sounds like there's general consensus regarding the mobile food dispensing vehicles and the food courts. The thing that seems to be in question appears to be those food trucks that currently exist, which there are, based on our last census, was 16, that do not move and have not moved over all these years. And that's what we were trying to accomplish with the mobile food vendor definition. And by having special regulations for those particular vehicles, so you might have to separate them out and say mobile food dispensing vehicles go once, or goes every 48 hours max, and then the second category would go, whatever, if you wanted them to go,
Yeah, some of
wanted them
these-
to move, or if
some
you
of
didn't
these
want them to move.
vendors already have site plans in place with the city, though, in order to operate, or no? At this time,
I
no
would
one
say
has any?
generally, no. They're long existing.
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
Do any of them
Existing.
currently have a site plan allowing them to have their,
None of them should have a zoning approval. None of them, since I've been here in 8 years, have had a zoning approval. They have business tax receipts, which is a completely different issue. And we've made the council and previous councils aware that until this issue was resolved, and because it was on the table 8 years ago when I got here, we're in the third version of this ordinance now. We weren't going to allow them permanently until the ordinance was adopted. So none of those 16 should have a zoning approval. If somebody digs out an old certificate of use, which was the old verbiage, which is really a zoning approval, we changed the terminology to be more user-friendly. I would be very surprised if somebody pulls one of those out and says, here, I'm vested. Okay, we deal with it. This is what we want. We want everybody to fit nicely in a category that you're comfortable with, and then get them all zoning certificates. That's the end goal here.
so a mobile food vendor has to have a minor site plan and power is allowed. That would be a truck next to a restaurant or a truck next to a business. If they had the UL approval and a minor site plan, they would be able to park there.
If they went through a formal, minor site plan process.
They would get that zoning certificate. And then, other than that, if it's just a dispensing vehicle, wouldn't need that
Correct.
site plan.
Correct.
But could a dispensing
Because they're
vehicle?
leaving.
Could a dispensing vehicle apply for that site plan if they wanted to use and hook up power?
If they wanted to become permanent, yes.
Okay. So I think we're moving forward in a good way. Overnight parking on a city property, I think we discussed this at the previous CAL. Parking and operating are two different things. So if you're parked, that means you're not operating. So one of the discussions brought forth by a business owner in the downtown district said that a lot of his business is late night food. You know, the bars don't close at midnight. The bars close at 1, 2, 3 o'clock. People are going to want food at that time. So I would love to see when we write this that it definitely says operating, not just parking.
Versus non-operating.
Versus non-operating. So non-operating is fine. I'm okay with midnight. It can't be just parked non-operating, but I really like to see the ability for someone to operate into the late night. Because in downtown, our CRA district, our entertainment district, the only thing open that late is Waffle House. So, okay, Nice Guys Pizza. I'm sure there's other restaurants that could, but I think it gives an opportunity, as long as that they're operating, that they don't get shut down. Yes?
And so if we're going to allow them to use the city-owned parking lots to operate,
Mm-hmm.
then they still have to get permission from the city
Yes.
ahead of time.
So I do want to see how that explained a little bit better as far as what it's going to be because of those two parking lots in Club Square and in Big John's being in the heart of our entertainment district that we've worked so hard and spent so much money trying to revitalize to where we are accepting on that. So I want to see how that policy is going to be written on whether if it's approved by Vince or approved by the city manager, or if there's other issues on obtaining those permits. So I think we need to be willing to, even if it is just a permit that you have to get, to allow food trucks to come in and prosper. It's something that we need as we grow as a city. I'm okay with moving 48 hours once a month, because of the fact that someone who's going to be there can fill out a site plan, they could get power, they could have that, they're an asset to the business that's around. Just like Ms. Tate says, people line up to come at true value. You know, everyone can go because there's a Lowe's and a Home Depot, a big box store you run to, but if you had the choice to go to the mom and pop hardware store because you're going to get something other than a hot dog or Italian sausage and get your goods there, it could be a draw for the business and keep our businesses going. So I would want something longer than every 48 hours. I'm okay with 48 hours and a 30-day. So I'm on the opposite end, I believe, of a couple council members, and I think we can find a happy middle for it. So other than that, I think we're getting closer, and I'm interested to see how it actually reads when it comes forward. Thank you.
Councilmember Shepherd.
What I'm looking at is the safety of all the citizens in the city. And what I mean by that is I'm not thrilled to death with 30 days, once every 30 days moving. To me, a motor vehicle needs to move. And what I look at is the scenario is we have an evacuation. We have a storm coming, we're being told to evacuate. And now we all know we're going to get in our automobiles in most cases and we're going to evacuate and we're going to leave our brick and mortar because we can't pick it up. But you know, the people that own these mobile food services, they're going to want to evacuate. They're not going to want their business to be destroyed. And if it's been parked somewhere for months at a time without being moved, I don't want them to become a liability to the citizens trying to evacuate. So picture a food truck that's been still for, over 30 days or even a couple months, and now he wants to evacuate and he pulls out on Cape Coral Parkway and his tires blow out because they're dry rot from sitting so long, or there's mechanical failure just because it hasn't been running for so long. It becomes a liability to the rest of the people in the city, because we're not going to set up any kind of inspections on, you know, is the vehicle in good shape? Can it start? Can it move? You know, it's a motor vehicle. It's no different than if I have a sports car in my garage that I never use and it's just my Sunday driver, or once every couple months I like driving around town in it because it's my special vehicle. Well, we all know that you can have that special vehicle in your garage, out of the weather, out of the elements, and go to start it, and it might not start because it's been sitting so long. And it can also have mechanical failure from sitting so long. So I'm not out to make a problem for these people that have these type of businesses. I want them to flourish in our city, and I believe they're an asset as well. I don't know the true time. I don't know what the timeline should be. I just know I'm against any of them being still for a long period of time, because I worry about the possibility of them being a liability when an evacuation comes or they have to move and it won't start, or the tires are dry rot, or things like that. I know if it has to move, you know, frequently through the month, then that person's going to naturally keep it in shape because they have to drive it. You know, they're going to stay on top of the maintenance because they have to, because they're moving it, they're driving it. So that's my concerns. I don't want to create a hindrance for them. I'm trying to find the sweet spot. I want them to be, I want them to flourish here. I want it to work. I have a problem when I see the establishments that have been still for so long that haven't moved. And I know if we had to evacuate, that's their livelihood, and they're gonna move it. And when they try to move it, it might not be as easy if it's been sitting for a long period of time. And you know, we can't cover every base, unfortunately. But I'm looking at the safety part, and I just want to make sure if it's a motor vehicle, it's a motor vehicle. It's able to move. You know, if the fire department has an emergency and say, hey, you have to move. I don't want it to be, oh, I haven't started it for 3 weeks and the battery's dead. You know, if we have them moving, at a good pace, I think a lot of them liabilities won't pop up. So that's my concern with the movement part. I think movement is important to keep the vehicle in the condition that if it needs to be moved for any reason, an emergency, you know, that it's going to be able to be moved. That's my concern. Thank you.
Councilmember Cosden?
Yes, thank you. Before we make our final decision, I would really like to get input from food truck owners, not just at public hearing, but if they have a professional organization or some sort of chamber that we could reach out to, because we're making these decisions with plenty of information from staff, but with no information from the people that are going to be most impacted. And I just want to hear what they have to say. So that's my 2 cents before I go into the answers to the questions. As for how often they should move, I'm with Councilmember Welsh. I think it should be every 30 days. If we do every 48 hours, my question is, how does that work? Do they just move to the opposite end of the parking lot? Do they drive around the block and come right back? Do they go to a different site every 48 hours and they don't have a home base anymore? I'm confused about how that would work. And I also am confused with a 30-day, if it's 48 hours that they have to move, is it 48 consecutive hours, or is it 48 hours over the course of those 30 days? So that question, if I could get an answer to that, that would be great.
Okay, I'm going to ask Amy to address the latter question, and then I have an answer for the first question.
I would be happy with miles on the vehicle.
Right now, we have it at 48 consecutive.
Okay. And they can just operate somewhere else for those 2 days, or are they supposed to shut down for 2 days?
So they could operate somewhere else.
Okay.
I would be happy with just miles on the odometer, where
Councilmember
if they just
Cosden.
start it up and drive around the block, I'm fine with that.
Councilmember Cosden has.
I'm sorry.
Councilmember Cosden?
Thank you. So that would be my suggestion. Vince, did you have something else that you wanted to say?
Yes, two organizations that we are working with and that we will continue, and they'll make sure we vet the ordinance with them. Donna Germain, the president of the Cape Coral Chamber, has asked to be involved in this, and we are going to involve her very closely when the ordinance is redrafted. And Amy had informed me that there's a food group in Southwest Florida. So we will certainly ask them to come to the table and review the ordinance.
That's good. I like that. I apologize for the baby noise in the background. So that's my answer for number one. I think that if we're on like opposite ends, so some of us want every 48 hours, some of us want every 30 days. I think every 7 days might be a reasonable compromise, but we'll get there when that discussion happens. For question number two, how many on one site? I think we should just defer to existing law and code. I don't think we should be, because that's too broad of a question. And then for question number three, overnight on city property. I say yes if there's a permit, because I think there are limited reasons that a food truck would be parking overnight on a city property. For example, if we invite them to a city property to serve to employees, for example, and they have a permit to park overnight, I think that's fine. Again, it's all about with permission. So that's what I have. Thank you.
Madam City Attorney?
So we have, first of all, we have different types of city property. So I think when we keep talking about city property, we keep honing in on our city parking lots, and most specifically, we keep honing in on Big John's and Club Square. But in reality, we do have more, even in downtown, city-owned parking lots than that. But we also have things like parks. So that's city property. So are we thinking we would give permits for them to park there in the hours that they could park there? Okay. Now, we also have some food trucks that are not operating as food trucks at the site where they are located. Let me clarify that for a moment. Are we all familiar with the Greek spot at Big John's? So my understanding is that they have, I don't know how recently, but we'll call it recently, acquired a food truck, but they do not operate the food truck at Big John's. Their restaurant is at Big John's, their brick and mortar restaurant. My understanding is the food truck goes away and operates in other places. I don't know where, but wherever they go elsewhere. But the food truck, I think, comes home at night because that's where the brick and mortar business is located. So even though it's a food truck, it's not operating as a food truck at that location. So that raises another.
They are operating there as well.
Are they operating at Big John's?
When they're really busy, they are.
Oh, when they're really busy? Okay. Well, let's say they weren't. Because I'm pulling them out for no other than I know that they exist. So how are you all, what are you all thinking about that? Would they be treated differently than food trucks that in the daytime or at nighttime or whatever are operating at the parking area if they're not operating there as a food truck? Just out of curiosity? Kicks and grins?
I just want it to move sometimes. I don't think there has to be a time.
Right, I'm not talking about the moving, I'm talking more about can they be there overnight? Can they, do they need a permit?
I think a permit
Things of
would be
that
the
kind.
easiest way to solve that, because it would be approved by the city manager or whatever department director could evaluate the fact that it's a business that's there and it's using it for their parking. So I think that would be, my solution would be a permit for that.
Councilmember Long? Are you there, Councilmember Long? Councilmember Hayden?
Yeah, I'm starting to argue with myself now, and I hate when I do that. So, getting back to the 48 hours thing. Okay, if we require them to move, and Councilmember Coslin kind of touched on it, every 48 hours. In order for them to return to the same location, is it a day gap before that clock starts over again? Is it, when you say if we require them to move every 48 hours, and they can go down the street to another location. Let's say they want to come back to that same location, based on that premise, what's the time frame that exists before they can return to that same location if they've moved after 48 hours?
If they moved for 48 hours, they were in the parking lot, they moved for 48 hours, they could leave for the 48 hours, go to 2 other stops, come back to that same spot.
Okay,
And then
but
the
they
30 days
couldn't
start
return
again.
to that same spot for
Yeah.
48 hours?
Return to that spot for 48 hours, you know, so you actually become like a kind of a cycle. You're like basically on every 2 days.
Okay, so they could come
If
back
you-
in. They
if
could
you're
come back-
doing-
They could come back in 2 days.
Yeah, if you're doing a
Okay.
48-hour versus the 30 days
Yeah.
with 2 days in between.
The problem with once every 2 days, once every 31 days is, you might as well call it a food truck park. If the permit if the business is big enough that they can have 4 food trucks, let's say, and they can all stay there for 29 days, you've essentially created a food truck park. You've done that, okay? Depending on how the permits would work. So, to me, there's not a huge difference between how we differentiate between moving in 48 hours or telling someone they can stay there pretty much all but 24 days a year. It's pretty much what you're saying. So, and I think at most food truck parks, that's probably how it would work anyway. So, this is a really tough one to try and nail down and dial down, and there could be different scenarios that exist in terms of permitting on how this works with those that are truly mobile and want to leave for 48 hours, go to different places, come back, as opposed to those that might want to be part of a food truck court or a hall, which essentially, based on what you read, is what we're creating by moving just twice in a 31-day period. That's pretty much permanent. I mean, there's not a huge difference in that.
Yeah, I think based on the discussion we've had so far and what staff presented, which had looked at those 2 categories as the same, I think it's clear from our discussion that there needs to be timeframes that are different from the truly mobile and then the ones.
Yeah, I think there's several different categories
Yeah.
here that we're going to have to mine
So
through to get.
We'll look at that for sure.
Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you know, another example is, you know, you take the, if you go to Home Depot, you got the trailer there. And they're there permanently. Now, I'm not exactly sure if they're hooked up to electric, if they're hooked up to water or sewer, but I think, like Councilmember Hayden, you know, we have to try to take all that into account when we do this, this regulation. And I think that we have to possibly have several different categories or definitions of what a mobile food court is. Or if they're at Home Depot, if they're hooked up to electric and water, then maybe that's a different classification. And then have guidelines for each classification.
And that's what we've attempted to do with that, the mobile food vendor, is really looking at those ones that don't move, like the Home Depot and the Lowe's.
But there's a number of those. I mean, the 16 number is low, but that we tried to do our best on an inventory very recently within the last 2 to 3 weeks. But it's not surprisingly low because of COVID.
Yeah.
So, but we have some that you just talked about, and there's one at Lowe's too.
Mhm.
One at Home Depot, and they're basically mirror images of themselves
Right.
outside those buildings.
Yeah, so I think that, I think staff has some work still to do to try to navigate us through these different scenarios. And then this definitely, I think, should be another topic of discussion at a
Another
CAL
CAL
meeting
discussion?
for the future. Maybe once staff maybe takes a look at these different classifications and, you know,
Okay.
try to get a good understanding of how we can try to get this right the first time.
Okay, so if it's the council's desire to place it on another CAL, we will work very hard to have the new ordinance for you at that CAL, rather than a presentation where we're just asking you for policy recommendation or policy decisions, and then we'll put it in an ordinance. We'll actually have a presentation, but the presentation will be the ordinance. It'll be within
Yeah, I think, or maybe the methodology of how we're going to approach this,
Oh.
maybe, and have that discussion at a CAL before you go through the whole process of an ordinance, and maybe get the buy-in from council at that type of methodology is how we want to move forward. Because I'd hate for you to do all that work. You bring that information back, and we haven't had time to discuss it.
Okay, either way, we have the ordinance written, we're just going to make
Some changes.
adjustments based on this conversation tonight.
Okay.
So it really isn't a lot more work.
Okay,
But we do need to get buy-in from the other groups, and maybe we'll talk to them, hopefully they'll come to the CAL.
okay. Yeah, so I think that would be a good, Councilmember Tate?
I just wanted to ask, Lee County has a new food truck ordinance, I believe?
I'm not sure if that one passed.
I didn't, that's what I was
believe
going to
it- I
ask you.
believe
Did
it-
it or did it not pass?
I
I know
believe,
there's something on the agenda.
I don't think it did either, but I think it's coming back. So can you just find out what their issues were and see if they're similar to ours? And I know Councilmember Nelson is very vocal on the food truck. So again, you know, before you prepare an ordinance, I know she has things she would want to say.
and I did speak with our colleagues at Fort Myers because it was on their agenda on Monday, and they tabled theirs on
The
Monday.
city of Fort Myers?
City of Fort Myers did
Okay.
table theirs, and what staff had indicated to me is that the council felt it was too restrictive.
Okay, and then, so check on Lee County. Thank you.
Yeah, again, it's on their agenda. I think they're meeting tomorrow, is it?
Tuesday, the county?
Uh-huh.
County meets on
Tuesday.
Tuesday? Yeah, so it is on their next agenda.
Oh, it is. Okay, so
I have it here.
make sure we check on that.
One.
Okay, does that give you the direction, Mr. City Manager, you're looking for?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it sounds like it isn't cooked yet, since we're talking about food.
Yeah,
We will
it's a
bring
work in progress, it sounds like. All right, roundtable discussions. Does any council have any roundtable discussions? Councilmember Hayden?
Yeah, Mayor, could you explain why we pulled golf from the agenda tonight? Because I had worked, had a discussion with the city manager, worked extensively with the golf course committee to allow them to speak, and with the chair said he could join by teams, and it was a surprise to me that it got pulled and put on next week's agenda.
Yeah.
So if you could explain.
Surely. In my conversations with the city manager last week, he was going to provide some additional information that I thought would benefit the council in having regarding the RFPs that was submitted to the county. He was going to give us a broad overview of the minimum and maximum amount as far as what they presented or submitted to the city. Apparently, he was going to get some of that information from the finance director, and I learned today in our discussion that Mr. Mason apparently has been sick, and that's why he wasn't able to get that information, a part of our backup material. So at that time, I decided to pull that item until he had the opportunity of getting all that information. And I asked him today, just so you know, if he thought that he could get that information for us, for we could have it for next week, earlier today, and he may be able to elaborate further, but earlier today, he said it depended upon Mr. Mason's return to work, so maybe he could possibly enlighten us a little further on that. So I'm hoping to have the information so we can have this discussion next week.
And I guess, and what he's looking that up, I just want to make sure that it's only in the discussion stage.
Yes.
For next week. There'll be
Yes.
no other.
Yeah, he's trying to give us,
It's at a regular meeting, and, you know, and I've always stressed with the bigger ticket items that we have that discussion first committee of the whole, so there's no surprises for the public.
yeah, and if he couldn't get the information in a timely manner for next week's posting of the agenda, then we were going to put it on the CAL meeting the following week.
Okay, okay.
He's going to let us know in that.
Yeah.
So staff believes we can have the information that was requested in time for next week's meeting.
Okay. All right. All right, any other roundtable discussions? Okay, seeing none, time and place of future meeting. Yes, sir.
I do have one, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Just to be clear, before you start reading the time and place of your next meeting, you're scheduled to come in for your budget kickoff winter retreat beginning Thursday at 9 a.m. Initially, we had talked about you being there all day Thursday, all day Friday. There was a conflict on your schedule for Friday with the MPO, so I'd like for you to officially announce that your afternoon session on Friday will begin at 1 p.m. and we'll advertise it accordingly.
Yes, sir, I already have that. I have that change noted in my,
I didn't know that, sir.
yes. Anything else, sir?
Nope, that's it.
Okay. Time and place of future meetings. We have a regular meeting of the Cape Coral City Council scheduled for Wednesday, January 19th, 2022 at 4:30 p.m. here in council chambers. Also, we have a City of Cape Coral retreat, which has been scheduled for both Thursday, January 20th, 2022 at 9 a.m. and also on Friday, January 21st, 2022, beginning at 1 p.m. at the Cape Coral Yacht Club Ballroom at 5819 Driftwood Parkway here in Cape Coral. Is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.